lens. And this meeting is being recorded right on cue. But if you're online, just a reminder that task force members and technical advisors should be showing up as panelists in the Zoom window. And if you aren't, get in touch with either Dan or Scott, who are sitting right here by our sides, and they will help you get to the appropriate virtual room. Again, this is being recorded. All of the meetings have been recorded, and the AI Task Force's website holds those past recordings, and you can access that through the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future, otherwise known as GOPIF, which is much easier to say. This meeting will be longer than any of our past meetings, and just so that you're aware of that. For those in the room, we'll have lunch around noon at about the midway point. As Scott was just mentioning, for those of us in the room, the restrooms are just out that door, a quick U-turn, actually just the opposite side of that wall. We don't have, except for the lunch break, we don't have breaks, so I just expect everybody to sort of meet their individual needs, drift off, and come back, and we won't be offended by that. So let's dig into today's plan. Today's meeting is for a chance actually for us to reflect on the last draft of recommendations, which, by the way, are available. You can see a pile right up there. And if you want to get a paper copy, please feel free to do so. We've been working the past several months to pull together a set of ideas that are hopefully reflective of the documents in front of you. This is a great opportunity to hear from each of us on anything that we may have missed, anything that we would be proposing at this point as a recommendation that, or something that we should take another look at, and to make sure that we're responsive to the charges that were set forth by the governor in her executive order last December. I'm going to spend a few minutes providing some context and background, and then remind everyone what our timeline is for turning around these recommendations, since we are nearing the end of our journey. First, I'll lead us through the changes that the staff have made to the recommendations. And actually, if you have the printed copy, it is in red line version, so those will be easy for you to identify. Next, we'll spend a good part of the morning session hearing from the last two groups. So you'll remember that we heard from the first four groups, Phoenix, McLaughlin, or Mark. Yeah, are you going to do the report, or are you here for Phoenix, or is Phoenix? Phoenix is on mine. Yep. Oh, I see you, Phoenix. There. Actually, there is a screen that has the roadmap on it, so everyone is sort of in smaller blocks up there. So Phoenix will guide us through the recommendations from the Economic Opportunities Group, and Justin Carey will open a discussion on AI-related harms and how we might think about protecting ourselves from that. After lunch, Mary will take controls, and we'll spend the remainder of the day thinking about the ever-important question of implementation. How can the state take these ideas and make them a reality? So we do commit to adjourning by 2 p.m. On the screen right now is the agenda, and then I think the next screen, there we go, is the roadmap. This is just reminding us the larger task force roadmap, reminding us of the larger task force roadmap and work that we've accomplished through the spring and the summer. Then we'll turn to the goals for today's meeting, and we'll also preview what we're hoping to get done in the remaining 2 meetings. So there will be just 2 meetings after this. So hopefully you'll remember this slide that's up right now. And Dan, I don't know if you want to just sort of, I guess we don't need to spend a lot of time sort of rehashing that, but that's the history of what we've been to this winter and spring. The task force work was exploratory in nature. We heard testimony from local practitioners and national experts about AI's current and future impacts, and tried to focus them on impacts that would take place here in Maine. In parallel, we had 6 subgroups thinking about impacts in each of some specific areas. And those would be the economy, workforce, education, healthcare, the public sector, and then, as we'll hear later today, potential harms that could come from AI. As you know, these groups were charged with focusing the conversation and drafting preliminary recommendations. So now we'll begin to pull those ideas together. Including today, we have 3 meetings, as I indicated, 2 more after this. Today's meeting we'll go into in just a minute, but on October 8th, we'll look at a complete draft of the full report. You'll see the outline in just a second. But that meeting will be our chance to step back and look at the big picture and make sure that all of the pieces have come together and reflect our work together. The October 24th meeting will be our final meeting, and we will see the fully designed and completed version of the report. As these meetings are happening, staff is already working on pulling together the drafts, the pictures that are necessary, the profiles, quotes for supplemental text, and designing the actual report, which will come back to us for final approval. So yes, that slide previews our work, and then the reporting structure. Is that the next slide, Dan? Yep. There we go. Okay. We want to give this group an opportunity to preview the final report. You'll see that there are sections of the report, the sections of the report that we're planning to include. This is nearly identical to the version we looked at 3 weeks ago, but there is one additional section, and that comes from our input, actually. We'll start with a letter from the co-authors, Mary and I, and then we'll have a table of contents, of course, an executive summary, and an introduction section that includes a description of the task force process. Then there will be the meat of the report, and it will be organized according to the 3 charges in the governor's executive order. We're planning on slotting each of the subgroups recommendations under one of those 3 charges, so we can try to be as responsive as possible to what the governor asked us to consider. We'll have a section calling out some specific areas where Maine could become a national leader, and we'll be drawing directly from our conversations on that. Then we have that new addition that I talked about. It is those ideas that are actually cross-cut each of the subgroups. And I'll spend some time focusing on that in just a few minutes. Finally, we'll have a series of appendices, which you can see here. That'll be the report. Turning to today's meeting, I am going to actually turn to Dan from GoPIF to run through some of the edits and recommendations that were made as part of our last meeting. So, Dan, if you take us away, we'll talk about recommendations and then come back for our next section.
Great. Thank you very much, President Ziegler, and thanks everyone for being here with us, many of you in person and folks joining us online. I'm excited to get into this lengthy and productive conversation. As you all will remember, about 3 weeks ago on the 5th of September, we met to discuss, as President Ziegler said, sort of 4 of the 6 topics that the groups that we put into place came up with. We got some great feedback, some really some fantastic sort of gaps that were identified, areas for further analysis and further clarification for those topics, and just wanted to spend some time here at the top of this meeting going over some of the ways that we've attempted to try to edit the recommendations to reflect that feedback. I'm also, just before I dive into this, just from a logistical perspective, the very kind folks at the DHHS building will kill me if I do not say, everyone, by the time we leave today, should make sure that they fill out, there's a sign-in form right at the front there. No need to do this in a second, but just at some point write your name on there. And secondly, just for folks in the room, I have been in meetings in this room before, and I know that the little green circled microphones up on the ceiling can be pretty sensitive. So just to try to keep that in mind as we're sort of having folks present here. So, but let's get into the fun part here, which is thinking about how we can sort of reflect what you all told us. I'm going to spend a few minutes just running through. I'm just going to spend a minute really on each of these, and I'll pause after each one and just see if all of this makes sense. I'm also realizing that the memo that is here in person doesn't have page numbers, so I'm going to be referencing page numbers, and you'll just have to take my word for it. I suppose that I'm right about that. So firstly, we spent some time talking about workforce, and I think the two big themes that we heard from folks on the 5th were these ideas around explicitly calling out the need to prepare for future funding opportunities and to be sort of get our metrics and data and our ducks in a row in case sort of funding comes down the pike for workforce training and other opportunities. And then we heard from a few folks here around an emphasis on making sure that we're engaging with working people and including the input of working people in decisions that are going to be made at the state level. So you'll see there's redlined language here that hopefully attempts to address each of those here. So recommendation number 3 around Ready Maine's workforce investment strategy, I think did get decently redlined, just both to pull out sort of to pull back a little bit from the specific examples of sort of layoff triggering retraining and career assistance to the bigger picture of making sure that we're ready. The systems at the state level are ready to handle some of those pieces, and also include this, acknowledgement that these things are moving quickly and evolving fast, and that we need to be ready to take advantage and pounce on funding opportunities as they become available. And then secondly, some language added to this 5th piece here around engaging workers to reflect some feedback that is hopefully a little bit stronger language, but also really gets at this idea of the potential of AI to bring people who were traditionally left out of the workforce into new opportunities. So before I move on, reflections or thoughts here about how we've attempted to make those changes.
Any thoughts?
I'll just share that one of the motivations was for some of the revisions from a labor perspective was just to say that this wave of automation and the impacts on the workforce might look very different, which is not to say that the workforce system wasn't designed to respond to a different type of impact on the workforce. It was just a kind of a contrast between thinking about the way that automation affected factory floors, right? That has a very concentrated impact in a specific geographic area and displaces a group of workers from a specific demographic group, which is not to say that the workforce system is designed only to support that type of impact. The impact of AI could be very different. It could affect many different industries spread out across geographic areas, and the workforce system is ready to support that. But there is a reality that there's a somewhat limited resources to meet that mission, depending upon the scale and pace that this might unfold.
So said another way, what we've experienced in the past are sort of siloed impacts where we can identify a location, and this could be a much broader brush of job classifications that cut across geographic areas and different industries. And you feel like the current draft captures that sentiment?
The revisions, yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then I think the other thing that we have talked about from time to time is that the workforce systems, as you mentioned, need to really sort of build the anticipation of change into the workforce development process. So it's an ongoing effort as opposed to something that will take time.
Absolutely.
President Daigle, we have
Yeah.
a comment from online. From Kim, who I think is sitting in for Commissioner Portman this week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. The sentence that was added, I guess it's at the end of the first paragraph there in section 3. It still says some state reemployment initiatives are designed for geographic, but we really still are statewide. I still I think saying that some of our programs are limited to geographic areas is a misnomer.
Okay,
I mean, if there's a layoff, we can apply for a specific grant, but the WIOA funds that we get, all of the funding that comes through us is targeted for statewide.
and reflecting on that, I think that we can make that that modification, because I don't think the intent was to say that the system is not prepared to react across all parts of the state, but that the impact is more, has historically been more focused on certain parts of the state. And this has been indicated has the possibility of sort of cutting across geographic areas.
Yeah, when I read it, I took it as being, for example, it's statewide, the programs we have. Well, let's say you have a mill closure or something happens. Traditionally, that's been a geographically concentrated area. So that's how I was reading it. And so in moving forward, we might have other geographically concentrated areas based off of broadband access or what have you. So, but this isn't my subgroup, so, but I'm just sharing how I read it.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And obviously I'm covering for Commissioner Fortman, so I wasn't involved in the previous discussions. But we can, I can take a look at that and maybe connect with Mark and Eric offline.
This may fit in workforce, this may fit in potential harms or both. But one category of workers not currently mentioned here is creative workers and their rights, where the right to protect intellectual property, I think, is well recognized here for companies, but for individuals, maybe not so much.
Right.
That's something that I would like to see specifically mentioned.
Okay. Good feedback so far. Anything else? Anybody online? Okay.
All right, 9 o'clock, we'll just keep buzzing through here. So we also spent some time with our education recommendations. And I think what we attempted to do here is to emphasize a couple of different things. Number one, in this first bullet here is to make it very explicit, sort of the type of activity that we're talking about, which is finding the pockets of excellence and uplifting them so that they can be used as a model for innovation and for peer learning and peer-to-peer sharing. And I think as someone who was involved with drafting that, I think that was the goal, but I think we got some really great feedback about making that less ambiguous and much more explicit. And so hoping that comes through here, but happy to talk about that. There was this other piece around how sort of non-state folks are working within these same systems and towards common goals, and how we can continue to forge these kinds of partnerships. And you'll actually see another reference to forging external partnerships when we get towards the additional section that President Daigle mentioned around cross-cutting recommendations, but just making sure that's called out here. And then I think a couple of different folks mentioned in multiple different areas this idea of adult learners and lifelong learners as being a really important target population. So attempted to make that again much more explicit. I will also say the one other piece that is reflected here is the sort of full removal of number 6, and that is partially recommendation number 6. And that is partially because of this creation of this new cross-cutting section of the idea that monitoring for federal policy impacts is important in the education context, but is important across the board. And so calling it out as a part and parcel of the larger cross-cutting work that we'll get to in just a moment here meant it felt a little duplicative to have it listed twice, but your feedback there.
Representative Sir.
This is a comment that may fit that cross-cutting section. One of the things in both economy, workforce, and education, there's a lot about growing skills of workers and growing the economy and growing efficiency in the economy. I did not spot, may have been my oversight, a reference to the goal of the economy to be the broadening of prosperity and the broadening of family supporting jobs. So that is something that I think is more of a cross-cutting theme than any one of these buckets. That's what we want to. That's clear.
I think so.
Yeah.
Dan Scott, you got that because you'll be doing the drafting.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on the education section? Anybody online? It seems like we are good to go.
All right.
Walk through healthcare.
Absolutely, and I've got Lisa next to me here, which is fantastic to help us with that as well. So for the healthcare section, I think we heard a couple of different pieces of feedback again. I think some of the edits that were made here, I look at number 2 and I think about how and again, this is reflective a little bit of some of the cross-cutting recommendations around AI literacy being this foundational piece. And I think where the clarifications that we attempted to make in this is to call out exactly what why training and literacy for healthcare workers in particular is a place of great need, given the high sort of variability and the high level of stakes within the healthcare field, the need to make sure that folks are adopting and utilizing and learning about AI. It sort of rises to a level just a little bit higher than just a baseline level of AI literacy that, again, we're going to talk about it in just a moment. So that was a one piece that I think we heard. And then a couple of different folks mentioned, and this in recommendation number 3, this preparing the regulatory landscape to sort of enable capturing opportunity, but also to make sure that weighing those against the potential risks and how we can make sure that those two are both reflected, again, explicitly, unambiguously as sort of focus areas for you all. So that's where we are.
So thoughts on the health, the healthcare section. Yes.
Hi, Lisa Letourneau, and with apologies for not getting this to you ahead of time again. Really just a few things. I think it looks great overall. On number 2, I would just add in terms of who's involved in partnering to develop new training modules, I would be remiss if I didn't call out patients or consumers. I think they need to be involved in the training as well. And then my only other thought was under number 4, in terms of upgrading technology infrastructure, the Duke AI partnership, which I love. I just wonder if that belongs more appropriately in number 1 about an innovation hub, because they're really not about helping states build technology infrastructure, they're about helping implement or learn how to use AI innovations. That was great. Thank you.
Right. Other thoughts on healthcare? Thank you, Lisa. Anyone online with any thoughts or comments on the edits that have been made? Or any gaps?
Supportive of the edits, and I do like in particular the AI literacy piece. I think that's going to be a big one for us.
Keep barreling through here, I think. So the 4th and final topic area that we talked about back on the 5th was around public sector use of AI. And actually in your memo here, you'll actually have to just take a skip over topic E. This is topic F. That's how it shook out there. But again, if there were page numbers, you could go right to page 17. Unfortunately, again, I have to take my word for it. So from the sort of public sector side of things, I think what we tried to do with these edits is we made a couple of small sort of verbiage edits, but I think the big edits here on number one is to separate out this idea of capacity and planning into something resembling a slightly more explicit call for roadmaps and guidance and things that are a little bit more of an explicit directive as opposed to sort of the slightly bigger picture piece here. So try to make sure that we called that out again much more clearly there. And then I think there were some folks that we got a bunch of really great feedback around in number 4 around municipal governments and local governments, how that is not, these tools can not just impact sort of a city or town government, but also other publicly owned entities like utilities and things like that might also benefit. So those are I think largely the places that we're talking about here. Again, a couple of small changes in number 2 that are just making sure that the technical piece and the policy piece are both reflected there, but the last piece.
So, same set of questions, comments on public utility or on the public sector piece. Everybody's good with the edits. We've not got any gaps. We have one comment.
For those who haven't met, Sabrina Jodro with
I'm gonna
the
fix it.
Department of Energy Resources. Speaking on behalf of Acting Commissioner Burgess, just wanted to raise a point specific to number 4, to potentially include considerations and protections for large load growth for ratepayers. Considerations.
Can you say this a little louder?
Yes, considerations for ratepayers in terms of protections for large load growth and increase in effect on ratepayers.
Yeah,
Okay.
got it.
Got it?
And I think I'll also just point to the fact, I think when we do a conversation a little later around the economy piece from Phoenix and around the risks thing, then there could be some crossover there on the energy piece. So
On the energy.
some fuzzy lines between these two groups.
Other thoughts on the public sector? Thank you for that.
So this is kind of a general thought, and I feel guilty for raising it this late and not at the prior meeting, so apology first. I guess I'm thinking and maybe concerned that when we say broad-based things like position AI as a policy priority across state agencies, it goes into a bucket with sort of all kinds of other big picture policy priorities. And sometimes they get lost because one thing that state agencies do, as someone who's represented them, is they reasonably are working sort of like fire people in that they're dealing with things that are immediate emergencies. And then maybe, if they're lucky, 1 or 2 big ideas, you know, that the current administration or leadership really, really thinks is important and wants them to be working toward. And so I'm wondering if there's any way, I'm not saying I have the answer, of course, to tag this or flag this in a way that it doesn't simply become another one of those that I've seen over my years representing agencies an awful lot of, and they kind of, like I said, go into a basket.
So interesting. I'd just like to tease that out a bit because I wonder, I got you right. I wonder if there is a comment and you know, sort of maybe parsing of this. But as I read it, I actually kind of looked at it a little bit differently. And I'll just tell you the work that we're doing internally within the Maine Community College system is to actually do and build in procedurally a programmatic review that says that we're attentive to AI, the impact on in our case, workforce, and what those implications are, and make that sort of a part of our regular review and dialogue. And that's actually different than a major policy or programmatic initiative. So I first off, just want to tease out from you sort of those 2 thoughts, and then kick it back to the drafters. And I know Ryan's got a comment. I don't know about others.
I mean, that's a really very interesting alternate take on the same idea. But I guess what I'm thinking about is, and maybe I'm not accurately reflecting the community college system, and I apologize in advance if I'm not.
I was just
But-
using this.
No, representing the state, in my office, you get a very good idea of exactly the depth, breadth, and differences of agencies around the state. I mean, attorneys like me represent clients that have such wildly varying degrees of knowledge, capacity, expertise, resources, literal bodies in their offices. That's sort of what jumped out to me, because perhaps, and I'm sure your campuses are also unique and vary, there's an ability to standardize or direct top-down initiatives in the community college system and deploy personnel appropriately. But I mean, I'm just throwing out as an example, my office reviews a ton of state contracts, and the differing abilities and knowledge bases and negotiating power of the varying state agencies is really, really, really either horrifying or fascinating, depending on what you think about contracts in general. And so that's what I was thinking about.
Okay.
That maybe your folks, and again, I don't mean to,
No, that's all right.
they might have a commonality that state government writ large doesn't have.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a good observation in the short term. I think my hope anyway, one person would be that when you get a little bit further down the road and you get to that kind of that place where where we've got to that training level and we've hopefully leveled that foundational knowledge, that it's not, I'm thinking back to my DAFS days, it's not just here's another initiative, but instead, and this is my steady state right now, is that I take the AI piece and now I use that, to help me with that full mission. It's not a separate thing. It's every, when we do our strategic plan, we are using, which is a big priority for us, we're using AI to help track progress. And we've got another priority and we're using AI to help us with that. So I think ideally, once we get to that foundational level, you'll use that piece, for your other initiatives across
And my thought is quite similar to yours, and yes, maybe we need to put something in here, but I'm viewing the AI as the ability to help some of these agencies that don't have as much resources to help level the playing field in the sense that it brings them more resources. So how we word this, just, in a roundabout way, say, this priority is gonna help you with your other priorities, so therefore it's a top priority, but anyway, I concur with what's being said here. I just don't know how to reflect that into this document.
Let me ask Dan and Scott, if you feel like you can capture the conversation, sort of parse it up over the thing. I think at the policy level, there's a piece in the sort of that it's ubiquitous, ongoing review. There's a piece there. So
At the risk of putting my boss on the spot, I do think, I'm curious, Sarah, there might be analogs to how the administration has thought about climate, and elevating climate is something that all parts of the administration have some role in. Is there anything for you that resonates in terms of thinking about Sarah's comment and what might be integrated here to sort of leverage what we've learned about elevating climate as something that agencies are all tackling?
My head actually went to the conversation that we're gonna have after this, which is more around implementation. Because to me, thinking about sort of how you take the policies and put them into practice, with the example that you gave, I think it is sort of how you bring it down a level. So I was thinking more that this will be a really interesting thing to pick up this afternoon. But I think it's a really good point. I really appreciate how both of you kind of flipped it and it becomes less about sort of adopting something in a silo and more about how it helps you address the other challenges. And I think the point about capacity is a really good one that applies both to agencies but also to communities, because I'm really hopeful that this will be helpful to some of our smaller municipalities as well.
Right, and I was in this subgroup, and we had a lot of discussion around it helping the smaller municipalities, smaller agencies and capacities, but I don't know that that's necessarily as reflected in here as maybe it could be.
Andrew, you've got your hand up.
you, President Digler. And apologies for being off video here. I'm actually on the West Coast today, so the video connection is actually a little unstable. Couple just quick thoughts building on some of the prior subgroup meetings and the comments here, especially in the context of an ongoing potential of federal legislation as it relates to state moratoriums on AI policy and infrastructure. Similar to how Scott and Dan and Nick, I know that we've talked about sort of something comparable to the Public Innovation Hub from an educational institution standpoint. Thinking about some of the comments made in the analog to climate and the presence of a focus around state procurement, I do wonder if there is some form of standing mechanism, dedicated capacity, role, clear position where AI policy continues to manifest in a consistent and standardized way to inform everything from procurement to individual agency adoption. And I don't know, I don't know if that addresses the prior comments regarding the standardization of contracts. But certainly when we think about procurement and we think about the standardized way in which the state has approached community resilience and climate planning, it's been helpful to have a process and a method and a clear destination to where that policy starts from. And I'm just wondering if this is the section that fleshes that out, and sorry if that exists in a different section, but I'm just wondering if that bridges some of the comments that have been made.
As the original commenter, I like Sarah's idea about talking about it as implementation. I guess, I was sort of, I don't want to use this word the wrong way, triggered by the notion of, the capsule language that I feel like I've seen in many, many, many initiatives, but I think that's a great idea.
Okay. There was a chat supporting your notion as well, so.
Representative Sarah, I think that's.
Oh, okay. This may just be a single word suggestion. That word is legislature. I'm gonna go out on a limb and suggest that our legislature is not optimized for efficiency. And AI. So in talking about investing in state capacity for AI adoption of government, so legislature, so there's a lot of things we've done in operations, providing greater transparency to the public, resources for legislators to be more effective in how we do our work, and also training staff and electeds.
Well, my comment kind of builds off that, which is there's a lot of language around state agencies, but I don't want to forget the judicial branch, all the quasi-governmental entities that really aren't agencies. When I think about the rollout of some of their technology, the judicial branch, which I'm not an expert in, I think they would admit it's not been as smooth as they would like, and the cost has been high, and maybe there's room for improvements. I just want it to be really broad and not kind of executive branch focused, so.
Doubling down on that, okay.
I just want a sign that says not optimized for efficiency today, thank you.
Let the record show that the left side of the room concurs. Do you want to move into cross cutting?
I think just in a couple of minutes here, my computer will cooperate here. You'll see if you flip the page here, a brand new all red section that is, as I mentioned and as President Ziegler mentioned, is attempting to respond to the feedback that we got last time around all of the breaking down some of the silos even between these different groups and recognizing that there's some foundational activities and principles and guiding mindsets that might be that might cut across and do cut across lots of different topic areas. So there's some language in here. I'll just quickly bring out the three pieces that I think I heard last time, which were, as I mentioned, sort of monitoring the federal policy landscape, which, as I said, was sort of pulled from a number of areas. promoting literacy, which I think we're gonna hear about a little bit later on this morning from Justin and from some of the other the recommendations out of that group, but as you all know, has popped up in many different conversations. And then in this idea of engaging external partners and not having this be state only, and making sure that we are leveraging the resources that we have here in the state, whether it's our higher education systems, whether it's businesses, unions, other folks that we've that we rely on to help make these kinds of changes. I will put in a plug for as you think about this in particular, if there are any that do not fit these are the three that I heard in the conversation last time. But if whether it's in the next few minutes here or over the course of the afternoon, the morning and afternoon today, if you think of others that might fit into that bucket of cross-cutting, please feel free to raise those and we can continue to flesh this out.
I'm just quickly looking. The one thing that I don't see here that I think is cross-cutting to everything, and it's a recommendation, it's something that I think in this state we don't have a ton of control over, but would be remiss to not mention it or make the recommendation, and that is having the infrastructure to even do any of this stuff. We don't have the electrical power. And while we've got broadband, the need for it's gonna be much larger. So without that infrastructure, the rest of this is all moot. I mean, we've got a really tough infrastructure for this, and we need to work on that, even though maybe the power companies and the broadband companies are a little bigger than us. But
I'll just say, I think when we transition to Phoenix's piece, that does come up in the economy section, but interesting to consider where it fits. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you, I appreciate that.
I was wondering about the monitoring the shifting federal policy landscape. Who do you think is going to get that response? The state is a big term there. We had a similar recommendation in our UMS task force, and we kind of stumbled around a little while, and then we eventually extended the life of our task force. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that, but we felt it was important that we have someone to do, and we went back and forth whether that should be a standing board committee for us or a new group, and we stuck with our new group because we all understand the topic and so on. But it is a question because it's changing all the time, and it's a big deal. And so is that your office? Is that DAPS? Is that DOE? Is that who is that?
I might point out that in the previous section, in that first bullet number 1 that talks about positioning AI as a policy priority, there is a notion in that second paragraph that talks about an interagency leadership council that does reference charging that group with monitoring AI trends. I think what I'm hearing you point out is we may need to go back and sort of reference back to that.
I love that part, that's great.
If that fits, that would be a pleasure, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Not an identified gap, just a point of gratitude. I'm drawn to the bullet at the bottom of this page, cross-cutting, promote AI literacy for all Maine people. I think that is important. We understand the diversity of this state, urban, rural, impoverished, a little more affluent. And since my initial introduction to this team, I just want to applaud that I have viewed everybody looking at this in terms of the impact on one Maine. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. Other comments, other thoughts? Yes.
So I'm not sure if this would be appropriate to put into here. I also really love all of these overarching concepts. I think they all make a lot of sense. Within the promoting AI literacy for all Maine people, I noticed that there wasn't anything around understanding the bias of AI, like the data that you put in is the outputs that you get out from the AI systems. So I wonder, it may not be necessary, but I'd look for feedback from others on should we just put in a sentence about that AI literacy also incorporates understanding the kinds of biases that AI can have and the kinds of outputs that it can provide based on the data and from the individuals that those data came from as an option. Because I didn't see it in a lot of other components across the rest of the report. So I thought if there were to be any place that would appear, that it would be under the AI literacy section. So just a thought to offer.
Yeah, there's concurrence there as well, so.
And I'll also, like, again, just put in I think when we have a conversation in a little bit about some of the recommendations out of Justin's harms group, and there may be some crossover there as well.
Great.
Okay, others? Okay, we're ready to transition.
Ready.
And I think we're right on schedule, which causes me to offer an apology. I mentioned or I thought about introductions beforehand. We're going to go to 2 presentations right now. So Mary, when we pick up in the afternoon, it might be appropriate to just go around the room. I kind of paused on it because there were people still filtering in, but we'll go around and do introductions. But to keep us on schedule right now, I think if we can, we'll go to Phoenix and get their report out on the economy. And then continue the conversation with Justin and the conversation around potential harms. We'll move into this afternoon, which will be really a very thoughtful conversation. And then just make sure that we've got the opportunity to everybody in the room has connected through introductions, if that works. So any other thoughts or comments before we move into Phoenix's report on the economy and recommendations coming from that subgroup? Okay, Phoenix, we've got a couple 3 minutes, 5 minutes for you, and then some discussion around that before we go over to the potential harms conversation.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, Dan, for pulling this up. So yeah, I'm Phoenix McLaughlin. I'll do my own introduction, I guess, since if we didn't have time for that. So I'm the Director of Strategy Implementation for the Department of Economic and Community Development, and I was helping out with the economy subgroup of the task force, and so that's why you're hearing from me now. So I'll just run through these because, as President Degler said, I'm only going to spend about maybe 5 minutes running through these, and then we can have more time for discussion. And of course, the full descriptions are in that packet that it sounds like you have a physical copy of there. So yeah, just to run through these, number 1 was about expanding entrepreneurial assistance for AI-enabled startups and other small businesses in Maine. So what this one is really about, there's 2 pieces to it. One is the AI-enabled startup piece, so ensuring there's appropriate assistance for startups in the kind of AI space, whether they're creating their own models, their own tools, using AI models, that the business itself is kind of an AI business, and ensuring that Maine has an ecosystem that's able to support and grow those types of businesses. Just it is a growing industry, obviously. But then the other piece is everyone else, right? All the other small businesses in Maine, and ensuring that they are able to use AI tools to improve their own processes, whatever that may be. And of course, because it is such a potentially wide array of things that businesses could be doing, the thought is just to make sure that these types of assistance is broadly available. So one example that came up was something like the Maine Technology Institute's Maine Entrepreneurial Resource Corps, or the MERC program, which did have, and I think currently does still have, a particular AI learning aspect to it. And so there might be ways to build on that, but the recommendation is just broadly to expand that type of assistance. Number 2 is to spur national leadership in AI innovation by producing training data sets for Maine's high potential industries and pressing challenges. So this is really about the data side of things. So of course, any AI tool, AI system is really only as good as the data that goes into it. And that's even more true if you want to be applying them to a more specific sectors, not these kind of broad-based ChatGPT type things, but a more specific application to a specific industry or problem, then in that case, you really need data that's relevant. And so this recommendation was really about how the state might be able to encourage or directly support a kind of data ecosystem. Open data ecosystem was the phrase we were using, that has those data sets ready and available for those innovators who are looking to use that data. The next one is to help private sector firms, community nonprofits, and other organizations enhance cybersecurity. I think this one kind of came out of merging with some of the recommendations from other groups, but this is kind of what it sounds like on the tin. The expectation, and so far it does seem like the reality is that cybersecurity threats are increasing due to the ability of AI tools to, well, I think across the board, both on the coding side of things for more maybe behind the scenes cybersecurity threats, as well as things like phishing and other attacks like that. So there's just going to be more need for that, and there are some resources available. Again, that Merck program from MTI might have an angle on this, but there's also things like the Cybersecurity Center at the University of Maine, Augusta, and just making sure those resources are available and out there, and organizations are using them. Number 4 is to improve access to advanced computing resources. I almost said commuting resources. That might be a different task force, but for computing resources, the idea, again, I think this one is kind of what it sounds like, especially for those businesses that are themselves developing AI systems or tools. You really do need the computing power to do it, and that is not cheap. And it is also not necessarily, it's not, I guess I would say this, it's something that came up a bit. We I don't know if he's here today, but we have Michael, who on our subgroup, excuse me, who himself has an AI focused company, and he was pretty direct that is a huge expense. And to the extent that the state wants to be able to foster those types of businesses, finding ways to support that either with some kind of physical asset investment in Maine, or at least helping provide access to those resources based elsewhere, that could go a long way to supporting growth in those types of businesses. Number 5 is around providing regulatory predictability to support safe adoption of AI tools by Maine businesses. So this is, again, just that some kind of predictability, stability, reliability, I suppose, of the regulatory environment can make a big difference for, again, really businesses of all types to be able to understand what is coming next and have some predictability for adopting tools in a good way. Again, this one, it's not really saying do or don't do some kind of regulation, but it's just, I think what can be troublesome is when there's a bunch of kind of swings back and forth, or things change rapidly every few months. I think that can be tough to deal with. And then lastly, this was a broad one, and Dan alluded to this a couple of times. And this is to continue to strengthen Maine's broadband and energy infrastructure to prepare for AI's impacts. And this is actually kind of what Jay was just mentioning as well. We need these other infrastructure pieces in place for AI kind of use to be able to grow in some noticeable way. Broadband, maybe most immediately and most directly and most broadly, in that even if no one in Maine is trying to create these tools, if we're going to be using them or accessing them, you do need pretty solid broadband to be able to do that. And we're making good progress on that, but of course there is always more to do, and want to ensure that infrastructure is continuing. And then the energy side of it is, of course, really for data infrastructure itself. And I think I don't need to go into that. It's all kind of in the news how energy intensive a lot of this is, and it is impacting energy systems in other parts of the country and the world. So that is something that is kind of backbone infrastructure here that needs to be addressed at the same time. So tried to run through those quickly. I will turn it back to you all in the room, and we can move into discussion and questions.
Let me first, are there any clarifying questions for Phoenix or the subgroup? Everything's pretty clear? Okay. Any thoughts or feedback on the recommendations? There are, I think you've got 6 overall.
You got two hands to your left.
Oh, sorry.
Phoenix, thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I find the recommendation 2, the spurring national leadership by producing data sets to be super important and something that we've touched upon tangentially, but the data preparation issue and like just how different the starting place is for take a town or a school district that has data all electronically in a redacted form that's easy to synthesize into a training set versus like everything that's physical that needs to be redacted and filtered through before it can be put into a system that might not accept physical data. So just like, I think that cuts that to me seems like something that it belongs here, but also might be something, Dan, we could at least consider putting in the cross-cutting section, because like that seems like core to AI literacy is understanding the steps needed to utilize AI in the first place, which I think fundamentally is a data preparation issue.
Excellent.
Thank you. So this just kind of popped into my head based on the comments about targeted incentives. And I don't know if it makes sense to include in here, but some of us sit on the taxation committee and we find it's very hard to understand what all programs exist out there for businesses trying to do different things and how they can be stacked. And I think it would be great, especially based on the Auburn example we heard, to think about the state actually creating a tool that anyone can use to figure out, this is what I'm trying to do. I can go to MTI for this, I can go over to this private firm for that, and these are the 6 tax credits I'm actually able to put together in what way. Because I think that there might already be some, and then if we had that analysis, we can figure out where are the gaps, but you might be sad or upset to hear that the taxation committee is not sure where the gaps are, but we're not. And I'm not sure that entrepreneurs are either, so that I think could be an actual actionable tool.
Yeah. So that sounds sort of like AI in action.
Yeah.
As you've articulated it, I wonder if it actually sort of folds itself in as much as it's a part of the economy, whether it's a public sector recommendation. I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's right, that a lot of those resources were public sector resources, so, yeah.
At the risk of Jay putting you on the spot, I think you had a not dissimilar idea around economic development incentive sort of creation in that way.
Yeah, and I think she might have referenced it. So it would just be this tool where, like for economic developers, that when we go to help a business, we plug in all the variables, number of jobs created, wages, capital investment, and and then what the implications are on the local and state tax structure. And then it helps us put together a incentive package for them based off of the resources that are out there at the federal, state, and local levels. And the reason I've done it for a long time, so I'm pretty decent at it, but I don't know how many times I've had a project and a year later, I'm like, oh, we could have helped them this way too. So, and there are many foundations and things out there, so it'd be a robust tool, but the only way to really know that you're helping that business or the business is helping themselves is through some kind of AI empowered.
Got it. Okay. Other thoughts on the kind of purpose insert?
Yeah, this is to the point that we're talking about, item number 2. This description might right now be a little bit biased towards startups, and I think that there might be greater application to helping existing businesses in Maine apply AI to their business. And I'm speaking specifically of industrial AI, not the consumer models, but models and weights applied to the data being created within your operation. One of the growth levers in Maine's economy is high productivity, small scale manufacturing. And the challenge is being more efficient than manufacturing elsewhere with lower cost inputs of other types. This is a way, I guess the recommendation is to have some way of enabling Maine companies to develop that competitive advantage by applying AI to their, to the data that they produce internally.
Maybe it's as simple as just mentioning it helping existing and startup companies. That would maybe cover it, because I know what you're saying. That's what I do with my group of manufacturers.
Hand up on the screen as well there.
Andrew.
Thank you. And I'm realizing, I know it sounds like introductions didn't happen. For those participating virtually, maybe could folks just start just introducing themselves real quick? Because I don't know who the last speaker was, but I'd love to follow up. So just real quick from the Connectivity Authority standpoint, Phoenix and subgroup, I think these are really, really strong recommendations and appreciate it. And also hearing Sarah and others emphasis on implementation conversation and thinking about the afternoon, I'm realizing much of this may fall into that portion of discussion. I do think there's a lot of linkage between recommendation 5 and 6 here. We are fielding inquiries from data center developers seemingly now on a monthly basis with varying levels of motivation and capital ready to invest. And I think key to success will be that cross-cutting interagency coordination. And I'm grateful for the work already underway with the Energy Department and MCA and others, how we respond to these efforts in not just a way that captures the opportunity, but then also aligns with other state policy objectives from an energy and from an environmental standpoint, I think is important to highlight, especially when we look at the sort of linkage between regulatory predictability and how we strengthen the infrastructure investment. So I think they are inherent in there, and maybe it's a part of the implementation conversation, but really appreciate how it's framed already.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Sarah, you look like you're ready.
I wanted to just add on a little bit to the comment about assisting existing businesses. I think there's an opportunity here to strengthen the language around sort of proactively identifying economic opportunities. So I might stretch it just a little bit further, but I really appreciated that comment.
All right. Good. Okay, if everybody's good, Phoenix, thank you. As has been mentioned, I think a thorough overview of the recommendations, and there are very strong recommendations. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think that's going to be good. Justin Carey is going to talk us through some of the potential harms that could be created by or exacerbated by the use of AI. And I think that's something that we're all kind of focused on. So Justin, if you give us sort of a 5-minute overview, we'll have close to a half hour then to sort of dig into that as a group. Does that work for you?
That works, yeah. Thanks, President Taylor. So our subgroup met, we're on topic E. It's page 13. But it's originally the focus was legal risks of AI, and very quickly it became like the risk. So it was clear that the risk scope was a bit limited. And so what we have here, starting up on the screen, it's also on page 13, is sort of what ended up being the kind of lodestone for our conversation, so to say, the potentially harmful uses and impacts of AI technologies, which if there ever was like a subgroup dedicated to a certain topic that might have engaged in like doomsday hypothesizing, it probably would have been ours, but thanks to the exquisite self-control of JJ, Sarah, John, Molly, Nicole, Dan, and Scott, we had some good conversations without really getting into like Skynet territory. But like one of the like implicit guiding principles of this group was like that that idea of like tend to the part of the garden you can touch, to rip off Jack Cornfield. And so we really looked at what Maine has like the capability of like actionably actionably addressing in terms of AI related harm. So the first recommendation, right, pursue near-term legislative and executive action in areas where harmful AI applications are clear, where laws do not yet exist, but proper regulatory responses are understood. In other words, this was like the pick the low-hanging fruit one. And fortunately, we're already off to a really good start in Maine, like the recent legislation and laws on chatbot disclosures, deepfake dissemination. There's other consumer protection, AI related, I think bills in the pipeline. I'm not 100% sure, but it feels like we're already off to a really good start. Our conversations here are focused on what we haven't seen yet and other obvious, risk pathways like AI election manipulation, deepfake mitigation, beyond just like what's been come to be understood as like the deep nude or child pornography law, and then increased cybersecurity investments and deepening consumer protection safeguards. John offered a phenomenal perspective on that maybe I'll encourage him to share today. The second recommendation is to study areas where harmful impacts of AI are still emerging, and where proper regulatory responses are somewhat ambiguous. So it kind of like highlighted a theme across all subgroups, which now that we've like integrated that cross-cutting section, we might consider integrating this into that like need to conduct studies to address key unanswered questions, especially in areas where it's evident that that further regulatory structures will be necessary. But the areas that we identified for study related to healthcare, which I think we've covered in another group, but agentic and autonomous systems, data autonomy and privacy, bias and discrimination, and ensuring tools are just generally deployed fairly that protect Maine residents' rights. So turning to 3, which flip the page if you're following along, the recommendation is to ground policy and principles of regulatory balance, accountability, transparency, and modernize standards and ethical use by government. So I think this reads probably like our most amorphous recommendation. And Sarah, you might have comments about where this belongs, and if we can maybe make it a bit more actionable. I think that the goal here was, it became clear that from our research analyzing other states, that crafting regulation at a technological inflection point is inherently difficult, and having some form of like anchoring principles to guide the decisions that will necessarily need to be made quickly seem like they would serve Maine well, and the ones that we felt like would serve Maine well in terms of those principles are balancing some of those protective guardrails with opportunities for innovation and access, modernizing regulatory thresholds, and committing the government itself to lead by example through transparent use of AI, which I think is probably the most concrete aspect of this recommendation. And I'd encourage people to speak up on that. The fourth recommendation is consider a broad statement of intent from the legislature to courts, explaining how and where existing Maine statutes apply to circumstances involving AI. So this is more just a practical recommendation that the goal would be a clear statement, not trying to create, AI specific law for every domain, but just saying fraud is fraud regardless of whether it is perpetrated with AI. Take the ambiguity out of it, so there's uncertainty in litigation that will be minimized, and then judges will easily be able to apply current law to tomorrow's jurisprudence. The fifth recommendation was a statewide public literacy campaign. I'm gonna skip that for now because I think we've talked a little bit about it. Well, I'll mention one aspect of that is leveraging some community institutions, in particular, like thinking about how to engage in a literacy campaign in parts of the state where it might be more difficult to do so, leveraging something like libraries or town halls or financial institutions and of course schools. And finally, just monitoring AI's emerging use cases and associated risks. Again, I think this is something that is a properly belongs in the cross-cutting section, but just figuring out how to mobilize state agencies to monitor novel AI applications. And again, we've talked a little bit about some centralized institution to report out. And maybe in our discussions, this idea of an executive branch entity charged with coordinating efforts came up. So that's it. I think I definitely want to thank all of the members of our subgroup for a phenomenal few months of conversations.
Thank you. Okay, comments. This is a pretty rich area for thought and comment. So who wants to lean in? Mary?
So about 10 days ago, there was an article in the Maine paper about protections for children and more explicit language around moving towards legislation that characterizes the deepfake of, child images used as pornography, I think is something that people are clamoring for, and to make that, a criminal offense to create things like that specifically for the sexual abuse connotation, not just the harassment part. So I'd love to see greater language around protection of children's protections for children, also because they're online and they're vulnerable, and those they share inappropriate content with inappropriate people that ends up in the wrong place. And we need to be able to consider that as part of the study, to look at enhanced regulations for that and enhanced protections for those groups.
Thoughts? Anyone online? I don't want to mess folks up there. Ryan?
I was just gonna give the committee credit for, I thought threading the needle really nice. I'm a big AI guy, as you can tell, and I thought I'd have heartburn with this section. I thought it would all be negative, this, that, don't do anything. And I think you picked out the things that make sense. And so just wanted to acknowledge the good work there.
Excellent. Yeah.
I think that's a big lift by Scott as well. So thanks, Scott.
We have John online.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Justin, I think the group did a really great job in this. I just have a couple of quick follow-up points that I don't know if they need any amendments or any discussion, but I just sort of my observations. The first was on disclosure. Anytime we mention disclosure, I think just bare disclosure is often not enough. In most cases, we at least need some kind of reference to effective, plain language notice that really gets the information through in a way that's not just a mere technicality. Secondly, on deep fake impersonations, I think we need to make sure that to confirm that this is not limited to commercial context. I endorse the comment just made about protection of children. So I think that we should make clear that the issue here is also related to individual fraudulent or coercive scams against individual residents or citizens. A third quick comment is on healthcare. Again, we've talked about this, but the licensing of healthcare providers, assumes that they're humans. And when considering AI assisted care, I think especially coming from my perspective, we want to have a special focus on elder patients and their providers. And this could be really terrific for them, or could have special concerns for them, but I just like to sort of call that out. Fourth, I love the literacy piece. I don't need to talk a lot about it, but again, especially for elders, this is something that could be done really quickly and maintained as things evolve. We could leverage organizations like, AARP, the AAAs, cooperative extensions, et cetera. And in this context, I think the point earlier about not just literacy, but bringing out awareness of the bias that's created by AI and related technologies in terms of the distribution of information is a really important point. And then finally, the reference to AI as fiduciaries. I find that to be a fascinating concept as an attorney, but I also find it somewhat terrifying. And I think that's something that's kind of more far off in the future. So those are my quick thoughts, but I think again, excellent, very comprehensive job here by our group leaders.
I wanted to echo those comments about the skill with which you threaded the needle. A couple of things. Others have mentioned protection of minors. The term of art around deep fakes is NCII, non-consensual intimate images, that might want to be reflected in the actual language used. And then the other, again, talking about the deep fake mitigation, being clear that that we seek to balance not regulating speech or speech based on its content, but extending existing laws against existing crimes like fraud, exploitation, abuse, to the new applications that AI is introducing. Oh, and one other thing, in talking about bias, specifically mentioning law enforcement, I think would be a good idea. The AI applications in law enforcement are robust already, and ensuring that those are free from bias.
I agree, and I certainly, I'm Beth Lambert from the Department of Education, and I agree with the protection for minors and in reading the way that this is and needs to be very broad and law specific. I just wonder if we want to revisit the conversation. We talked a lot about this in education, and we had pieces, and we chose to sort of remove that. My memory is because there would be this section that would be more broadly on harm, and reading it and thinking about the specifics around educating our children and what is being used in their classrooms and transparency and data protections and bias and the way that bias might not present itself initially. So we might use something thinking that it isn't and then learn that it's starting to skew our understanding of what we're educating our children on. It's complex. I know it's all complex, but because it is talking about our children and in education that we protect, I just wonder if we want to revisit that there might be ethical recommendations. I can only speak for education because it's what I know best, but in that, and maybe others are feeling like that for their other specific areas, but this does feel really good because it is such a wide swath, but at the same time, I wonder, and maybe we want that because it gives us more autonomy in our agencies to, maybe that's what our responsibility is then at the agency after these recommendations come out, which could be the answer as well. But just in reading that, that's kind of coming to me is I have a lot that wouldn't be appropriate for you to put in here that are specific for the public education sake, but it should be noted, I think, somewhere.
Thoughts on that? You're good? Yep. Kind of, okay.
This is the blind side. I just want to re-elevate what the energy department said, because that was kind of like, let's maybe talk about that here. I would say even the presentation we got months ago was sort of indicating and matched what my thinking was, which is, our electricity rates are so high, you'd be crazy to come here and do this. And yet, it seems like there's legitimate interest. And so I think our group kind of thought, okay, we're not seeing that that's a major area of concern. And that was my feeling anyhow, of not pushing that. But I think seeing what we're seeing in the newspapers, hearing what Andrew just said, I want to just re-elevate that and make sure that it's in there. And the reason I'm doing that is because if there is going to be major demand, we need to make sure that those costs are not thoughtlessly pushed onto all ratepayers in a way that could really cause other economic issues and issues with our just equity around who's paying for it. So it's not just can we handle it, but is the cost being allocated to the right actors?
Great point.
You got that from a drafting perspective.
Just one quick thing, I just wanted to put kudos out for numbers 4 and number 5. I really appreciate the idea of putting out a statement of intent, so that kind of provide guidance across the board, because it's for everyone, even within the courts and across the board, to understand AI overall is going to be really, really difficult. And so providing that guidance from the start is really, really helpful, or will be helpful, I believe. And then the launching the public AI literacy campaign, I'm really excited about that. And I think that there's lots of different ways that each agency and partner organizations can assist in that, and kind of focus their efforts on particular things like what you were just talking about, Beth. So I like both of those. Just want to say thank you for that.
Excellent. All right. Other thoughts? Go.
One thing, Nicole, that you had mentioned is just like that idea of your whole previous comment is kind of like a secondary risk or AI related harm that it feels like we didn't really capture in here, you know, like the downstream effects of AI and widespread usage and increased demands on our infrastructure. And so like, I'm curious if people think it would be beneficial to have a section like that, or something like a little bit more dedicated, not to like the direct harms, but the secondary and tertiary harms. And I think that's a great example of one, and I'm sure there's others that I haven't thought of too.
Well, I guess I would say I want to make sure it's in this report somewhere. I'm not sure I know where it should go. Maybe it's its own call out section kind of thing, but yeah, I think it is it's a possible secondary. Yeah, instance of concern.
Okay. Agreement? Nobody online that I see. Are there any, it sounds like subgroup did a wonderful job of, as folks have said, weaving the needle. Are there any gaps? Are there any places where there are specific areas of concern? The breadth of this issue is you know, kind of can't be understated, and trying to cast a tent is sort of brings everything together holistically is important. I can't say that I've identified any gaps, but are there any gaps or any areas of concern? But, go ahead.
This isn't a gap, but it is a question I wanted to raise while we have a few different legislators in the room. Item 4, a broad statement of intent from legislature to affirm the courts how and where existing statutes apply to circumstances. I'm not sure that that's what the legislature does. And I'm curious if I don't know how exactly we do that. And I was wondering if we could take a minute or two to think through what the charge the legislature might be that would be a little bit more tightly scoped to what we actually do, how we do our work.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but I was there for the conversation.
Oh, okay.
And I think that, John, you might have input too online. I think that the concept was, instead of just drilling down into every single place and saying, if it happens via AI, this is still a crime, or this is, you know, a civil violation, et cetera, that we could put, and there are places in statute where there are these broad statements, but it'd be something that lawyers and the courts could look at and say, oh, okay, we don't need to guess at, did the legislature mean AI is a threat actor in many cases, we see that here. That was the goal, but I don't know how it would be drafted, that's where we'll ask our lawyer friends to help us.
Is this the kind of thing that we make a charge to specific committees, to make a charge to the non-partisan staff to make recommendations, or?
I think it's broader.
So that's something, sorry, Sarah Forster from the AG's office. That's something that our office can help the nonpartisan staff with, because it is something that can be done, and it is something that is done in a way like you explained, which is instead of going into Maine law and trying to find every single place and say, but this too means AI. So we can help offline, not in this context, work with the nonpartisan staff to do that.
To that point too, I think one backup option we had there was like agency guidance letters or like a dear colleague or something that makes clear like AI as well for everything, you know, the DOE, for everything in 20A, you know, our understanding is like AI can, I guess, like the education law statute is a little bit more, it's a little bit more nuanced, but like, I think that is like a backup option of like some less than like a legislative statement of intent that we had explored and yeah, I don't know the extent to which it's unrealistic to ask for something like just not having any experience with the legislature.
I'm just not familiar, and maybe because I don't know, maybe ignorance, not absence, of the legislature producing something called a statement of intent.
Will go in statute.
I was gonna say, I think statement may be a little bit misleading in that it's an interpretive tool that goes in statute. But the other thing that you were just saying that's important is in the hierarchy of the legal world, we have statutes, we have regulations, we have guidance. And anyone who's had to suffer through any sort of presentation by me or any of my colleagues, we always remind you that if it's in statute or regulation, that equals enforceable. If it's in guidance, that equals potentially a thumb on the scale, but that thumb is fraying at the federal level. Not entirely sure how the thumb is gonna go at the state level. So that's why, even though I totally agree that the backup plan would be administrative guidance from the key agencies tailored to their agencies, the enforceability generally links to either a statute or a rule. And in this case, when you're thinking about something this broad-based, obviously a rule isn't super helpful because it would be hard to identify what the right one would be.
So maybe it's a charge to the legislature and the AG's office to collaborate in clarifying where existing law applies to emerging AI. And I think they want to state it, we may just take it as a given, and where we see that there are gaps in that clarification, then it directs us to take action where necessary as a legislature.
I don't have any objection to that. I only say from experience and tenure that we try very hard not to drive the policy. We want the legislative people to be driving the policy. We are tradespeople of a sort that can help you get it in the right place and in the right words.
So, but to turn that, is there a vehicle or a term other than statement that drives to the overall point? Because if I'm understanding the objective here is that there's some clarity that you know the legislature has doubled down and said because you used AI doesn't mean you didn't break the law, you did, and that there's some level of affirmation that can then be, you know, sort of reapplied if there's, you know, potential litigation in some cases.
I've heard this principle discussed in terms of transportation a century ago, a little over a century ago. We went from horses to motorized vehicles in the span of a couple of decades. And we didn't rewrite every traffic law. A lot of traffic laws just were adapted from horses to cars. And that's kind of the same thing that we need to do.
I was gonna say something quasi snarky, which every single person in my office would be like, all right, just get it out. That the sophistication of litigants from the horse to car era to the current era has exponentially increased. Probably because of AI.
That's good, important input to have.
I would just say, I think to just provide a little more clarity here, maybe it could say one option, maybe through a statutory statement of intent, so it's just clear that the vehicle is in law. It's not like we're sending a memo to everyone in Maine, like, we made this intent. I mean, that was obvious to me, but as we talked about it.
All right, we've run that to ground, I think. Yeah.
We
Sorry,
can
you-
pursue some options and shop some language around.
Okay.
Also, that points out that in the kudos department, we should note that the leadership of this subgroup had the unenviable task about having a disproportionate number of attorneys. We are generally not everybody's favorite group members.
I'll remain without comment, sort of move the subject to. Just one area where I've sort of focused in on, and that's the notion of a dedicated study. Feels a little bit, I think the intent is absolutely spot on. I am wondering whether it's feels a little bit one and done-ish in an era or in an environment that is going through such dynamic change. And as to way that if there's a way in which you give that particular recommendation some ways to grow on in the future. So once again, sitting here on the spot, I don't particularly have the language that does that, but of course, open to other thoughts or comments as to what that might be. Okay. A little bit like running a Zoom room. You sort of measure the quiet as to where we're going. We have a little bit of time. If we feel like we've run the risks to ground, I'll just sort of open the conversation to a little bit of a broader base, and then we do have a little bit of a time to take a break, bio break, and I think that's all right with food. So, but I'll explain the break and the timing. Is there anything else that we have or have not covered that we feel is essential to sort of drive into a point? We're now at that point where we have really all 6 sections, I think it is, that we've reviewed. We are going to spend the afternoon in sort of some really thinking through aspects, but I just want to get out on the table from recommendations and interaction standpoint. Is there anything that we place where people feel like, you know, we just really haven't talked about it, we really should? Okay. And given the minds in the room, the inability to, or the lack of gaps, nothing coming up with the gap analysis suggests that these subgroups have done an excellent job. So both kudos and appreciation for that kind of work. Just to remind people, this afternoon, we're going to go through a bit of an implementation exercise. Mary is going to guide us through that. Before we get there, we're going to get some nourishment and the opportunity to take a break. I'm told that lunch is here, and I think it's right around the corner in this direction. Is that right, Dan?
Yes, just outside the door to the right.
Okay, so lunch outside the door to the right, restrooms outside the door to the left. That gives us a little bit of a time for people to get some, get something to eat, maybe get emails if necessary. For those joining us online, feel free to shut your cameras off. We would like to come back and rejoin the conversation. We'd like to come back and rejoin the conversation at 12:15. So not an extensive break, but we are giving you an extra 7 minutes. Just saying. We may grab it back towards the end of the day.
This might be a helpful question for everyone. Can we get information on how to access the Wi-Fi?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The short answer is, it's not a short answer. It's not a short answer. If you have a state of Maine login, you should be able to access the SOM Air, the State of Maine Air website. If you do not, At the registration desk up front, they can spend, takes a couple minutes, but get you set up on the guest account. They need to create an account for you.
Or mobile
This is
hotspot
another
on the
classic
phone.
example of all of
Much
Maine
easier.
state government is actually not
Not
state
very
Maine.
true.
Cause we're a legislature, not Maine.gov, not Maine.gov.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. But it's the point, right?
Yes.
Now we're gonna get started and we have to fit in a couple of other things. So we need to go around the room and do introductions as Dave suggested. So we're gonna start with the people on Zoom, and I see Dan Nygren first in the list. So Dan, do you wanna say?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Nygren. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer at Maine Health.
Great. Nick, do you wanna go next?
Good afternoon, everyone. Nicholas Marquis, Chief Information Officer for Maine.
Julia?
Good afternoon, everybody. Julia Trujillo, Maine Community College System.
Kimberly Smith?
Good afternoon. I'm Kim Smith, Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Labor.
Eric?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Eric Austin, Deputy Director, Bureau of Unemployment Insurance, Department of Labor.
Phoenix?
I'm Phoenix McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Strategy Implementation with the Department of Economic and Community Development.
Emily?
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Braley, and I'm the MERC Program Coordinator for Maine Technology Institute. I'm here on behalf of MTI's President, Brian Whitney.
Yeah, I'm John Brodigan. I'm the Executive Director of Legal Services for Maine Elders.
Great. And then maybe in the room, we'll start across the room.
Good afternoon, Matt McIntyre, Representative for House District 18, representing portions of Penobscot, Hancock, and Washington counties.
Nicole Brahowski, State Senator for District 7, which is most of Hancock County and Idaho and Knox County.
Dan Sarah, Representative for House District 135, which is most of Kennebunk.
Mark McInerney, Director of the Center for Workforce Research and Information at the Department of Labor.
And John Drow, Economic Development Coordinator for the Department of Energy Resources, here on behalf of Acting Commissioner Dan Burgess.
Justin Carey, I'm an attorney with Drummond Woodson, focus on school and emerging technologies and labor law.
Dave Degler with the Maine Community College System.
Beth Lambert, the Chief Teaching and Learning Officer for the Department of Education.
Hello, everybody. Ruth Permish, Executive Director of the Maine Mathematics and Science Alliance.
I'm Sarah Forster from the Attorney General's Office.
I'm Dan Matz from the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future.
Hi, Lisa Letourneau. I'm a Senior Advisor in the Commissioner's Office at Maine DHHS.
I am Mary Dickinson. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of the Jackson Laboratory.
I'm Sipen Chom, I'm Technical Advisor, and I'm with QGO, an AI company.
Sarah Kern, Director of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future.
Ryan Lowe, I'm the Vice Chancellor for Finance and all things AI at the University of Maine System.
Scott Kleiman, part of the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation and the Future team.
Okay, another quick announcement. They may be coming around to take some, oh, we missed people in the back, maybe. You wanna introduce?
I'm Jackie Barwell. I'm the Deputy Director at the Governor's Office of Policy and Innovation in the Future.
I didn't want to end this year. I've been told they'll be coming around to take pictures. I think the pictures will reflect our hard work together in this room, but also our love of cookies. But that's okay. I'll put up, maybe they'll be gone by the time the pictures get taken. Okay, fantastic. I hope everybody enjoyed lunch, and we're going to jump back in this afternoon with an implementation exercise. Okay, are you okay? So before we start, I just want to congratulate everybody on where we are. I mean, really, months of hard work, and has really been distilled down to an amazing document that is really nearly there. So everybody should be super proud of all of the hard work that they've put in. The discussions have been just spectacular, really fantastic. Everything from encouraging vignettes to really discussions of hard, tough topics. So really want to thank everybody and extend the gratitude on behalf of Dave and I for all the hard work that everybody's put in, and really the place that we're at. Huge accomplishment. Okay, for the next 90 minutes or so, we're going to turn to an exercise about the how to turn this list of ideas into real action that the state and external partners might take to prepare Maine to handle the impacts of AI. So we're going to give you all a few minutes for some quiet reflection, kind of work on your own, on the questions that you see up on the screen. The first 3 questions I want you to reflect on in the room. The 4th question is going to be homework. and something that each of you can take a few minutes to reflect on and send back to Dan and Scott, in terms, and that's an open-ended answer. You can say as much as you want or do as much as you want with that. For the first three questions, I really want you to think about question one, of the recommendations your group is considering, and really focus on the group that you were part of and what you did. Are there any of those recommendations that need to be accomplished first in order for other recommendations to move forward? So is there something that really has to be done first so that things can follow next and there's a domino effect from that type of recommendation? The second is similar but different in that the second question is really which of your group's recommendations are ready to implement in the near term. So we're talking about priorities in both cases, but the first one is really about dependency and the second is really about readiness. So really want you to reflect on that. And in your mind, you may be asked in discussion why you've put those things first or what the dependencies are. And then finally, what are some key factors for successfully implementing, what are some of the key factors that are needed to successfully implement your group's recommendations? So are there any key salient points that kind of need to be solved or included to move forward? Okay, so with that, you'll have about 10 minutes of jotting down some notes, and then we'll get into the discussion for the rest of the time today. And I think we're going to be looking for volunteers to share their thoughts, or maybe people we'll go group by group. So those people that have been working on the group individually will talk about their recommendations coordinately. Okay, time starts now. Whoop, wait, time does not start now.
So to that last point of the group will sort of put their recommendations out collectively. Is there time for the group to work together?
There won't. So we'll do that dynamically. So when we get to the group, then each person will say, and then we'll But that you and I could work it out. And then or Dan is he's online, but it should be fluid and it should work fine. And I think this group has done a great job of finding consensus quickly. So I have high hopes. Okay. Barring any other further questions. Time starts now. It is time to start discussion. So we'll start with the first group on my list, which is economy. And so the folks from the economy subgroup, is there someone that wants to volunteer to give their recommendations first? Who are those on the economy, show of hands, economy subgroup?
2 online as well.
And 2 online. How about you, since I can see you?
Sure. Organize my thoughts for a second. On the economy subgroup, the first order of business, and I'd sort of divided these things from my lens in the legislature. There's basically 3 things that we can do. One is spend money, the other is change the rules, change the laws, and the third is I sort of call it research and information gathering. You can bring people together like this. And in the policy area, one thing that underlies everything else we're talking about is having a good data privacy and consumer protection framework in place. And we have data privacy in front of us as soon as we get back. And that's something that we have to take care of in this session because without that framework in place, it remains a lot of legislative uncertainty. In addition, on the policy area, looking at ways to reduce barriers, regulatory barriers for entrepreneurship, and beginning to build on the privacy law with a clear AI governance structure. Things that we could do right away. One would be to ask Merck, or maybe with collaboration of MDF and Maine and others, with some form of entrepreneurship attraction program. Adjacent to one of the world's primary innovation hubs in this area. We should be leveraging the strength of Maine as a beautiful place to live, attracting startups and early stage companies from the world. Second would be an AI enablement program for manufacturers and other businesses, including agriculture, spoke briefly at lunch, to support companies applying AI to their particular needs. And a third would be a threat reduction or business resilience programs for dealing with cyber threats. And the final thing would be there may be some need to either evaluate or fund growth of Maine's compute infrastructure.
Great, I think the rationale, they're pretty clear, but I don't know if anybody from the economy committee wants to expand on those or add something different or wants to add to the oomph of them.
Phoenix and Emily.
Phoenix or Emily, do you want to add anything? What was said? Did you hear them?
I'd be happy to add a few thoughts as well, just coming from the MTI perspective and the small business and entrepreneurial lens if helpful. In regards to question 2, which of your group's recommendations are ready to implement in the near term? Specifically concerning our first recommendation, MTI is currently supporting just through our regular funding, our grants and loans program, and also in collaboration with the RU Institute, attracting businesses nationwide to Maine, particularly those who are training AI models or developing businesses that are AI enabled. We're already starting to deploy funding to these businesses, and we've seen a large increase in the number of businesses who are requesting funding to support their businesses in these spaces. More sophisticated training projects, which are more resource intensive, as well as other businesses that are implementing AI within their workflows. So I think in terms of, is there anything that we could do in the near term? I think MTI could be positioned to support businesses with direct funding if needed. And also through our Merck AI program, which has been mentioned, this is kind of a pilot program, which may be interesting to consider. We have a partnership with Coursera, which, if you are not familiar, is an online educational platform that hosts courses from large organizations like Meta, Microsoft, IBM, as well as universities like MIT, not MTI, I always get those confused, or UC Berkeley, Vanderbilt. And we have already been deploying this program to small businesses and entrepreneurs to help them understand how they can implement AI in their workflows in the areas of marketing, finance, really what have you. They have a course catalog of over 350 generative AI specific courses. So that's covering point 2. And then for point 3, just some learnings from this Merck AI program when we're talking about supporting workforce and we're talking about supporting businesses. One thing that I found to be very important, which should seem obvious now, but I didn't think of it in the future, is a really well thought out marketing plan to help small businesses and entrepreneurs understand why it's worth their time to invest in these tools and this education and their learning, and to put their resources towards this, including their employees' time, especially with small businesses when they have so many different priorities, competing priorities for this education. And that's something we've started to do through MTI, is really up our marketing to help businesses understand why this is going to pay off in the long run.
That's great. That's one of the elements that you would need to get three moving. Okay. Phoenix, thoughts?
Yeah, I can add some thoughts. I will say it, at least for me, it is a little harder to hear you guys in the room now. I don't know if that's universal, but I think I did hear most of what Representative Sierra was saying. And one thing, just on this first point, and if I understood him right, he was kind of saying the regulatory environment needs to be in place for others to proceed. The only note I might add, which is in the sense that this first question is which need to be accomplished first. I think the phrasing is maybe a little different in that that's one that kind of needs to be accomplished the whole time and forever for others to work. So it's not necessarily an order of operations in the same way, but more of an ongoing challenge, perhaps. I do think in terms of what's ready to implement, I'm glad that Emily said MTI is on it in a lot of ways. I think being from at DECD, we tend to our best way to get things done is to ask MTI to do them, and so it's been good that they are kind of on it already. And I do think they are the best vehicle for a lot of this work, especially for the AI adoption for or AI learning and adoption among existing businesses, as well as investing in new ones. That whole area does seem the most, I guess, the low hanging fruit, in part because I think there's a lot of just general interest out there, people looking for answers and for help. And so to have a resource that's able to provide that, I think, is likely to be successful. And just the last point I guess I'll make around successfully implementing, getting the word out is going to be, I think, a challenge, despite what I was just saying. It's always tough to fully, saturate knowledge to make sure people know what is available. And the other two, I mean, frankly, the couple that we mentioned for recommendations around providing data sets, as well as access to advanced computing resources, I think those both could be especially powerful. And I also think it will be challenging in different ways. I mean, the data sets is just a very kind of broad potential set of actors, and there isn't like a clear, oh, you just write this one statute, or you just write this one, or offer this one pool of funding, and then you do it. It's kind of a more broadly based thing, I guess, that will be a little tougher to see through, despite being, I think, pretty helpful. And then on the computing resources, it's just expensive, and so that would be the challenge to figure out with that one. But I'll leave it there.
Any guys? Good, great, okay. Comments from anyone else on the committee around those things? Oh, you covered it well. Covered all of it. That's great. All right, maybe we move on to workforce then. Who are the folks on the workforce committee? Great. And you the only one here? No? Okay, Julia, okay.
Yeah.
So we have two people on the workforce. You're also on workforce? Okay, great. Would you like to start and summarize?
Yeah, absolutely. Mark McInerney, Center for Workforce Research and Information. I'm going to kind of tie thoughts around two of the recommendations, and they're kind of ones that we've been kind of thinking about and talking about the most, I would say, in some of our workforce conversations and at the Department of Labor is making sure that the workforce investment strategy and then supports for workers who might be displaced from a job are really ready for this AI era. And I think it ties in really closely to leveraging AI to expand reach, speed with which we serve all the constituents and stakeholders within the workforce system. In terms of successfully implementing those strategies, I think there are a few things that are needed. It's a further development of the data infrastructure, making sure that our data infrastructure are AI ready, and access to tools to start to be able to develop what we kind of envisioned. There was an example earlier that I think Jay raised about from an economic development perspective, having the ability for a business to put some information about a work site, the types of jobs they have, the wages, et cetera, and having a tool that can provide all of the various different incentives that might be available for the ways that the state could support that type of investment. We see something similar from a job seeker perspective or from a worker who might have been displaced from a job, is a tool that could be used to provide that person with information about the different types of resources or supports that might be available to them, or even catering to them based on maybe some information about their education or their work experience, specific career recommendations or specific opportunities to upskill. A tool like that that could be used by either the staff that work within these programs, or it could be used directly by folks that might just be looking for more information about the workforce system, resources that are available to them. So there, we really do need to focus on our data infrastructure, getting our data AI ready, and then hopefully taking a step forward in terms of getting tools that could be used, enterprise level tools or development level tools that we could train ourselves with unbiased, high quality information, provide feedback to improve the accuracy of those tools, test them, and then make them available to job seekers, employers, and all the constituents we serve. And would encourage other folks on the workforce group sharing thoughts they have.
Hi, everybody, this is Kim. Just to add on to what Mark says, I think one of the first things we could probably do is engage more with the State Workforce Board, as well as our workforce partners and some community navigators that we have for workforce, to start getting the voice of the workers and the voice of the employers on the impact of AI.
And just for our reference, that's to support which that you feel like there's readiness for. I'm just looking back at the recommendations.
I am having a hard time hearing, but I think it goes along with number 1 and number 5, if that's what you were asking.
I get it, yep. I was just trying to tie that to the recommendation. It's 1. Okay, great. Other comments or thoughts from the workforce group?
This is Eric Austin. I can chime in a little bit, and I really concur with Kim's assessment of this, and I think that, you know, our number 1 listed recommendation to again be actively evaluating the impact is going to be critical in making the right decisions about how we would implement the rest of the recommendations. So I think that would be something that would need to be at the top of the order. But like Phoenix mentioned, it would also be one of those things that has to be ongoing and kept up to date, because it's going to be constantly evolving in order to make, the right decisions on how we're going to implement the other recommendations. And I think that could happen, in the near term, if not even immediately, to begin to formulate that recommendation and the actionable steps required to put that into place.
Can I just say one last comment, President Degler? I don't disagree with all the comments that have been shared so far. I do think that maybe there's almost like a pre-recommendation of implementation. And what I mean by that is that many of the recommendations, whether it's our workforce system or expanding our training opportunities, I think an opportunity to scan the readiness of those systems, of our current training opportunities, to integrate AI tools and so on is critical to implementation. So doing a scan, I think overall it's something that I would include. And then I think the second point for me was that when we're thinking about AI across all these areas and trying to prioritize, that if we were to align a lead system or agency, or as Commissioner Smith mentioned, the workforce board, there are different players that are responsible for each of these recommendations. So I think we could do some things in tandem because we are different responsible parties. So just from an urgency perspective, that while I appreciate the research and so on, knowing that we also have to move at a rapid pace, I think there's things that could be accomplished at the same time.
I think that goes to question 3. Both of those sort of go to question 3, and the second point is really part of something that's needed before implementation is really triaging readiness across the board for the recommendations.
So, Mary, I did do some work, and I know Chris isn't here, did do some work with the workforce committee. Doubling down on many of the points that have been made. First of all, the iterative or the ongoing nature of evaluation, so that we're sort of in a continuous improvement model. And then to Julia's point, sort of finding a vehicle for using each of the state's resources to get to employers and employee partners. And within the community colleges, it's not comprehensive, and so coordinating with the workforce boards is absolutely appropriate. But the Alphonse Center for Workforce Development has compacts, have formal relationships with over 2,000 employers that does reach a little more than 50% of the Maine workforce right now. So enabling that vehicle and then coordinating our efforts with the workforce boards, I think can be a pretty quick response in terms of how we get to employers and how we develop that information base, and then size what kind of training and readiness is necessary for each of them. So just put that in the hopper.
Representatives here.
I want to add a comment and then a question. The comment is, good news is we actually already have a funding mechanism in place. I believe the Ergo Business Incentive, which is mentioned in the document, can be already be used for the kind of training, reskilling, upskilling of incumbent workforce can be done. So we've already done that one.
That creates a lot of readiness. Yeah.
Yeah. The question I wanted to ask is whether between those compacts and the workforce board, do we have a sufficient venue in which the education sector, representatives of workers and of businesses are getting on the same page about what resources need to exist to enable the workforce to be continuing reskilling in the right directions as needs come online? Or is there a change or an additional venue needed to ensure that that shared understanding is maintained?
So that's to me, yeah. I'm going to suggest that too is an ongoing effort. I think if we had gone into a scan right now, we're not going to find a level playing field. But there are some that are actually, university and university partners who are actively engaged, folks working through the Advanced Manufacturing Center, and then others who, are oftentimes smaller businesses, not logistically coordinated towards educational resources that are, going to be sort of in their mind, hey, that's something that's happening out there. And so engaging them, sort of bringing them in and getting their level of awareness and preparation is going to be different. And so I think the evaluation becomes an important tool. And then as an ongoing evaluation, it becomes a mechanism by which we can also begin to think about tracking progress in terms of that thing. The vehicle for doing that for a good number, but not the entire workforce, I think does exist. At least through the compact relationships. And the center, the Alphon Center does enable the business incentive, and the Alphon grant actually also includes some resources to help get that started. So I think leading with those resources gets those employers to the table quicker. That's a comprehensive answer, but that's what we've got for now. I'll get you more information.
Yeah, no, I got it. Thank you.
Any other points to raise or from the committee? We touched on all three questions, yeah. Okay, well, why don't we move on to education since that is next. Who are our education folks? There's a lot of us.
Yeah.
Who wants to volunteer to start? Sure.
I'll throw out just a couple quick thoughts. Don't know if it was a happy accident or by design, but I'm looking at the sequencing of what's listed here. And I think the bullets are in order.
You think it's because they were generated by AI?
So I think the priorities are proper.
So maybe you could comment on there's two ways to prioritize dependencies and readiness. Maybe you could reflect on those in this order.
No, perhaps I'm not using the right words, but I think each of these are dependent on the proceeding. And I look at number one and I recognize the introduction that Mr. Lowe gave, and I guess I had no idea that he's the finance director, vice chancellor, finance and administration, but he's also all things AI. And I recognize that expertise. So I think that is established, and then the trickle down of each of these to be successfully implemented goes based upon the proceeding. So that's how I would respond to that. Each of your group's recommendations are ready to implement in the near term. Number one, we have the recognized, I think, voice for rollout in the education campaign. So that one's ready. And then number three, what are some key factors for successfully implementing your group's recommendations? Referencing what Representative Sarah said, identifying funding sources clearly, because I'm not looking at this as just a random state expenditure, which Augusta is good at spending money. I'm viewing this as an investment into Maine's future, and that is where the government does play a role, because we have to make smart investments for the huge. The only other thing I would mention, basically, referring back to the vast resume of our group team leader. I come from settings, former organizations where everybody tried to do so much for so long with so little that everybody believed we could do everything forever with nothing. And so I would encourage a team to be grown to support Mr. Lowe in the rollout of this campaign. I think that's critical, because if you don't have that network of support, you're going to deplete real quick. That's
Chime in on that, build off of it?
Yeah, I would.
Yep, Brian.
Yeah, so as you said, just building off from that, starting with the foundational, I think for us, I definitely focused in on recommendation 2 there, which was provide comprehensive professional development for Maine educators. I think it dovetails nicely with the AI literacy for all piece. If you don't have that foundational knowledge, then everything after that is just not doable. You know, you can't address, you know, if the teachers don't understand the technology, then they're not going to teach the students. And so that seems like a core one for us. Ready for implementation, you know, I think I agree. Recommendation 1, recognize and supporting the Maine educators who are leading in AI innovation. Again, we mentioned that repeatedly in our report. The thing that we like the most is that, you know, there are all kinds of examples of this, and they're all in Maine. You know, they're in New York and they're in Madawaska, and we heard about them all in between. So this is not going out and trying to find something really cool that's going on somewhere else in the country and figuring out how we bring it back here. And we've got those. We've got mechanisms in the department already to help highlight those. I think that's a big one. And then I think when we get down to the implementation piece, it's ownership, and maybe not just one, not just ownership and you're responsible right there, but finding the groups that are part of that. So K-12 and higher ed and maybe workforce is that piece. And I think let my others jump in as well.
Yeah, I would, you know, I think, you know, I would agree. I think that as far as questions 1 and 2, I don't think we need to restate, but it's all wonderful, it's sort of underway and all very accessible in the near future. I do think the key to this is looking at the factors for successfully implementing that. And I think just as a general thing that I think it may have cut across all of the groups and what I've heard, but certainly in education, you know, we really talk a lot, particularly K-12 anyway, it's this feeling of being really cautious about expanding the infrastructure and ability for people to use and have AI. I know there's a global push in this and we want to stay ahead, and there's a financial piece and why the state is so invested in that. But also interesting that we have an entire section on the potential harms at the same time that we're pushing for accelerated investment in that. And so I can understand from an economic point of view and take myself outside of that, but certainly when we look at education and we think about the successful implementation of that, it at the department anyway, it continues to be the first lens in which we look at everything, and I think that's really important. Nothing else, in PK through 12 we deal with our children, and there's no more important asset that we have in this state, I think. And so we just want to be really mindful of that. And thinking about that as far as successful implementation, we think about, you know, this idea around equity and access. And if we don't ensure that that is happening in every area of our state and for every, whether it's multilingual, students with special needs of all ages, then we run the risk of widening a gap that already exists for a lot of other areas of education, and then we put AI into it and we exacerbate that. So really that was my number one is when we think about a key factor. I also think I love that we're doing this. I think clear guidance that our schools want and need clear guidance from us at the department, and we're continually working on keeping that not just a one-time thing, but something that we update regularly and it's live as this changes, and that the state needs to stay on that, is that we continue to be really clear and transparent about that need of change and about to be updated. I think there's a critical partnership between our, to the PK-12 public education and our higher eds, in particular our educator prep programs, because to get to number 3, that's key. We can't, we don't have the resource and capacity to continually, re-teach teachers that have just gone through a program. And so that partnership, so that we can be really building on the capacity that we have in Maine. I know educators, they should be this far down my list, but educators are a key voice, the co-design of this work with our educators and not in this silo of us deciding and being a top-down piece, and that comes from the way that we've written this, I think, in recognizing the pioneers out in the field and how do we raise that up. And then this really important, I think this speaks to the harms, is just understanding that we don't know. We've identified potential harms, we don't know all the harms, we don't know all the implications that are likely to come out as we do more and more of this. And so building in, I think, in our implementation, continuous feedback loop, continuous improvement, continuous research, so that we are never sort of just going blindly into it or think we pass a threshold with this, but that we're really doing that in a responsible way for our most important asset. So those are my thoughts.
I do have a sort of a question, which may be an augmentation, but in the continuous research, continuous assessment, is there an area where we should be including continuous professional development, so that as the technology changes and advances, we're also building our educator workforce to keep pace?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I think in number 2, right, reaching every educator is not a one-time done, you're checked off and you're certified in this, which probably goes again to like the workforce and other things as well, but yeah.
I wonder, could I just build on that, because it also addresses the harm piece, just as a specific example. The technology changes so fast that I was talking yesterday where I did a presentation for a bunch of faculty in May, just before they went off contract. And did one just a couple of weeks ago, and it wasn't even, you wouldn't even have known it was the same sport. Because the technology changes so fast, and I had a couple of faculty this week that freaked out because if you've used any of these AI agentic browsers like Comet, and now it's actually built right into Chrome, one of the things you can do is a little tab on the side, and you can have it do things like complete your mandatory training, for instance, skip all the videos, research each of the questions. And so our faculty have also figured out that if you're a student and you've got homework that's sitting in an LMS or something like that, where you need to log in to complete the homework or log in to take a test, you can do the exact same thing with the Comet browser. You can give it your login credentials, it will log in, it will take the test, it will do really, really well if that's what you tell it to do, and then it will submit your quiz and you'll get a grade sometime later. So that is, it's a little bit about the scary side of it, but it's also about the technology just changes so fast, and so you can't stand still, you can't have static training. It's a little bit why I worry a little about the Coursera. I think it can give you a kind of a basic foundational knowledge, but you can't rely on something you saw in AI that was created in March. I spend a lot of time on YouTube and trying to stay up to speed on what's going on. And if something is more than 10 days old, I'm not going to watch it. I mean, seriously, because the technology changes very fast.
So one of the things I love about your recommendations, though, is that you really recognize and support the pioneering educators, and you have this great, possibility of force multiplying training by elevating those people and making, train the trainers that will go out and train the trainers, and you really can build this great approach. Now, you would have to somehow make sure that everybody's including the appropriate safeguards and, judgment in these training modalities. But if you could somehow harness that and have, instead of building the workforce that directly trains, build the workforce that helps them to elevate their materials so that they're presenting both sides and really making it rigorous, that could be maybe money well spent, because you could exponentially expand the training and continue it.
Well, it's the model that we've been using in Maine for a long time because we just don't have even with our partners and this, we don't have the capacity to do it directly. So elevating and doing teacher leadership, it not only serves us, but it also, we know, helps with teacher burnout and retention because they feel that, it empowers educators and, honors and respects them as they should be.
But the difficulty in this space is that everybody could get off the rails in terms of what they're teaching or recommending. If there wasn't some way to regulate, some way to make sure that people are not just teaching people how to cheat, right? I mean, you want to make sure that, that it really kind of is well-rounded in that respect, right?
And just what's
Because
really
the individualism of it, I guess.
Mary, you have a hand on the
Sorry.
virtual hand.
Yes. James.
Yeah, hey, this is Jim Libby. Can you hear me okay? Great. So, yeah, I mean, I'd like to speak to that. I believe that we aren't quite specific enough with some of the training for existing teachers, and so what I mean by that is I think that really if you have an outcome, you have to start by reverse engineering it. So what do you want students to learn in any given exercise? And so when we implement the use of AI at my place of work, we're kind of focused on like the training, the expectation, like the rubric. If you tell students what they need to do and give them an outcome, they can use AI to do it. But in order to make sure that they're not, doing the things that were talked about earlier, like, just having AI complete the exercise for them, you have to have them demonstrate, and it has to be almost a simulation or performance, or they have to demonstrate that they are using the technology, and you ask them, okay, well, what were the inputs, what were the expectations for your exercise, how did AI help you, and have them do a reflection on that in front of everybody in the class. And so when I talked about a training last time in our education committee meeting, I think the thought was, well, we have the toolkit on the education website, the DOE website, and that's the right approach to it. But I just really don't think so. I think we have incredible resources like the AI Center at Colby, for example, and they have the capacity to train teachers through use of simulations on like specific kinds of problems to solve, and then have people, fully understand how did I get from, point A to point B, and what are all of the expectations of knowledge that you've acquired, and so you've then functionally trained somebody in the end. I think we need more specifics on how we're going to access that kind of training. There are a lot of folks in higher ed that can provide those kinds of experiences to existing teachers, and I'd like to really focus on the link between higher ed experts and what K-12 needs. That'd be my take on especially number 2.
And I'll just respond to that. So, we are very lucky in Maine where that we already have a number of classrooms, a number of schools, a number of collaborative projects that already have some of these innovative educators that are doing fantastic work. We have already some existing professional development, both across state agencies as well as nonprofit agencies and higher education. So, actually, I'd say education may be further along than some of the other focus areas. One thing that I want to do just to respond to what you were saying is that we have to be careful when we're thinking about educators because, of course, there's already learning standards that they need to respond to. They really need to think about what is going to work in their specific context, what is going to work with their specific kiddos, what's going to make sense for their community. And there are already so many businesses, so many products, so many curriculum providers, they're chomping at the bit to say, my AI tool is the one, you guys should be doing this. And that really, I'm a little bit nervous now that I'm thinking about that and hearing those responses about the way that number 2 is designed. Reach every educator in Maine with professional development supports focused on AI. You're gonna have 100 businesses and curriculum providers that are wanting to make a profit saying, I got you, I know how to do it. But in actuality, what really needs to happen is educators need to understand what are the menu of options available to them, and then be given some supports in how to understand what is high quality, what's gonna make sense for them, essentially, what is the rubric that each educator is going to need to know what's going to work for their classroom and their kids, and then be trained for how to do that well. So I think we just need to be thinking about how do we design the recommendations to be ready for knowing what that tidal wave coming down the pike is going to potentially be. Something else.
I want to just carry on with that, because I don't think that's unique to education. I think that's universal across this great AI hype cycle that we're in. There's just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of companies out there making things. So much that we're likely to have a stock market correction because of the overinvestment in technologies in this area. And separating the wheat from the chaff is going to take a lot of time and a lot of diligence, and it's going to be very hard to get to immediately without some help and clues and rubrics and trusting, different aspects of what you would choose to be able to move through that as individuals. And I think that's already true in healthcare, at least in my experience, that you just get contacted every week by X number of new companies doing X number of things that they want to come into your place and start using. And that's tough.
Yeah, and I think one other component that is important when we're thinking about implementing, we haven't necessarily called out the important role that administrators play. And they oftentimes are the gatekeepers within Maine schools. So how do we engage them in this conversation is going to be really important to the implementation. And there's lots of professional organizations like MCLA, Maine Principals Association, MSMA, that I think can be really fantastic partners for us and for everyone as we think about how to really make sure that these components don't just get pushed into a corner or are inequitably shared across the state. Because if we look to different technology initiatives that have worked well and different technology initiatives that have not worked well or a little bit in between, I'm hoping that we can learn from those lessons.
And I think if I may, just one more without belaboring, I just think that it's so complicated because education is like, we're talking about efficiencies, like everyone. We want AI for efficiency, like around how we run schools or do business and all of those pieces. It's about teaching our students to interact and use AI so they're more prepared for all the different areas that we've been talking about here when they come out. And then it's about using AI in education of our students, and particularly my world of PK-12 and how that is. And I think that third piece is very undermine the complexity of all of the things we talk about in here, but also really has that kind of depth of you can get spinning in that. Because I think that when we talk about that kind of AI, we're talking about AI in education that's got to reflect like the values of public education and what we're trying to do. It's not about efficiency. It's not about right, like what is correct, getting correct answers or whatever, because education is a relational practice. And so how do you then use AI in a relational practice? Like, because that's not efficiency and the things that we're talking about it as sort of the easy things that it can kind of like replace in the workforce. And we want to make sure that we have backups or things like that. And so how do we think about AI in education as supporting the human connection and judgment that we are trying to foster in our education systems and not replace that? And I think, that's what we worry about. And that sometimes comes into conflict, or it can seem to, with efficiency and sort of like we don't have a budget for this, and this can replace that, let's just do that. When we talk about education, I think we need to put that human component into that of like what we're trying, that's essential. And so the AI needs to work with that.
Mary, can I just do a quick time check here?
Sure.
We're well underway here. We've got 25 minutes left to get through.
Okay.
4 other groups here.
So we should probably, yeah, education's always a big one. We always get excited about it and there's so much great stuff on it. We didn't have a chance to get to it, but we should move on to healthcare.
Okay, let's move on,
Okay,
let's
all
move
right,
on,
thank you.
otherwise.
Okay, healthcare, I think this we can move through this quick because Lisa and I have already cheated off each other's papers, so I think we know what we're talking about. So we're gonna go, we collaborated. So we're gonna go to Dan Niger, without the use of AI, by the way, just regular cheating. Regular cheating. Old school cheating. Dan Niger, do you wanna kick us off and start with what you were thinking?
Yeah, well, I'm going to focus a little bit on what I think the first steps need to be. And for those, I really thought that 2 and 4 on our list were critical and probably also more doable than potentially some of the others. For one, it's nice to see over the last several months, I've noticed that the training offerings, even from some of the larger tech vendors, for example, we heavily rely on Microsoft technologies, and even they are providing some really good, at least introductory, and maybe even some middle tier educational offerings. So we're starting to take advantage of those at Maine Health, and I think others could likely benefit from those kinds of things as well. Obviously, we'll need to focus more specifically on the healthcare space for healthcare specific training, but the fact that these things are now starting to be available, I think, is a good step forward, and one that makes it a little bit more achievable in the near term. The infrastructure one is obviously one that we all know and wrestle with here in Maine. I think the good news here in terms of timing, and it may actually, the timing might be a little bit tight even, but for those not aware, there's a $50 billion rural healthcare granting process that's underway now. And all states are eligible. The state of Maine is very focused on applying for this grant. But part of the funding that comes with that allows for support of both infrastructure for states to flesh out their data networks, their connectivity, even things like monitoring in patients' homes and so on. So that's a big benefit that could jumpstart our efforts in this space. But also for things like education, there's even earmarked dollars within the proposal for education. So I think that's something we should highlight. Again, I don't know if there'll be early drafts leaked to the administration or whatnot, but it might be helpful because I think the state's deadline for submission is early November, and they're now soliciting feedback from the community due in early October. So it's a nice fortuitous thing that's happening there in terms of timing that we could benefit from. I think those are the major points that I wanted to make here.
Well, we agreed on 2 as being the answer to the second question, really the readiness priority, because it's readily doable. But again, it was one of those that would be early and often. You'd have to continue to repeat the analysis and find out what's out there, provide those resources, and continue to update those. I think we went with a different answer to the first question, Dan, and we put the regulatory landscape up there as a priority because it's probably the most difficult and will have impact to enabling the others, 1 and 4 in particular. And I don't know if you want to add some comments about that.
Yeah, I don't disagree that it's important. The reason I didn't put it up in my upfront ones was simply because there might be some bashing of heads between the federal landscape and the state landscape in this space. And not necessarily wanting to cause friction and trying to sort of glide path us on what we know that we can achieve ourselves. That's why I stayed a little bit clear of there. Maybe that's the wrong approach. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm risk averse or avoid conflict kind of thing. But I know that's been a topic of discussion.
No, I think it is a real tension between, what's the earlier discussion about regulation and is it the right time? Is it too early? Is it too hard? So I think just this notion of keeping people ahead of or informed of what's likely to come, what they need to be aware of related to regulatory issues, I think is important.
For question 3, we recognize that 4 is going to need a fundable plan and injection of monies, and it's great to hear about the initiatives that are out there now for rural healthcare. Certainly will help with that, but really looking at that carefully, not just within communities, but within hospitals and healthcare providers, and having access for people who are not in larger structures that can be out in the community intersecting with larger structures would be great.
Yeah, I also just added to that one, so certainly funding is critical, and the Rural Health Transformation Program is an important opportunity for the state. I don't know that there's any leaked copies yet, but I'll send to Scott for that. But the other thing I just noted was the need for provider buy-in and maybe more collaborative discussions among the provider associations. There hasn't been sort of a coalescing of those discussions yet, so it might be achievable, relatively easy thing to do to just start talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. One thing that I did mention that I should have is I think this notion of trust is important, both from a provider point of view as well as a patient point of view. There's got to be a comfort level around the use of these tools on all sides. And especially in healthcare, I think this trust component is key.
Great. Any other points? Anything else to touch on? We're picking up steam now. All right. AI related. We're about to go off the rails again. AI related harms. Let's move on to that. No, I think we can get but Justin, and who else is in this group?
Yeah, I don't know if does anyone from our subgroup want to take this one for this aspect? I think it's Nicole. I think you were the only one.
I'm the person.
You don't have to.
Well, I think the first question was about near term, right? So the notes that I had, or no, excuse me, the first things we should do. I think the state cybersecurity is a platform that, from what I'm hearing, seems like it's in a good spot, but just further emphasis that as any of these other groups that involve state agencies are building up and using AI, that the cybersecurity is like foundational in my view. And then the other one that I identified as like a very important first thing is just 3, and it's that 4th bullet point, ensuring government is ethical, transparent, and secure. It's kind of related in terms of you would want that to be a base before you start using a lot of AI on top. So that's my answer to the first question. If anyone else had.
Dependencies there, yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, one thing that we had in our recommendations is the idea of some sort of hub, whether it's like through the executive branch or elsewhere, but somewhere to be like this like brain trust of what's going on with regards to literacy, what's going on with regards to the studies, like I guess like something to like carry on the work somewhat that like I think this group that Scott and Dan have done in this group, but also just like, yeah, I think you had made a comment about like everybody expected to do everything without nothing, like, and I found that resonated, like going forward, who's going to be expected to be keeping track of the AI related harm and the developing harms and monitoring existing harms, and it just feels like an immense challenge. And I think like one of to answer question one again is foundational is to have some group, and I don't know what this is, but some group of people who are capable to be a centralized resource on that.
It's really a coordination and communication hub.
Yes, exactly.
We collect what's going on, both in terms of victories and challenges, and be able to disseminate them both within the active forces, but also out into the community. that what you're talking about?
Exactly, yeah, I think Scott, you had, and I'm sorry to take you away from typing for a second, but I know you had an idea about like, when we were talking as a group about like how that could be structured, and I'm wondering if I can ask you to. And I think if this doesn't ring any bells, no worries, but.
Well, we talked earlier in the next section, there is contemplated, you all have contemplated as part of recommendation 1 here, an AI leadership council that is staffed by principals from all of the executive branch agencies at least, to be monitoring this, and I think in many ways potentially carrying forward some of the work this task force has done.
I just wanted to link to that. There is, at the legislative level, there are a couple of working groups, multi-state working groups, one through the NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures, and another that's just a coalition of the willing, looking at AI. And there are a couple of Mainers, myself included, and also Judiciary Chair Kuhn, who've been participating in these for a couple of years. We plan to continue. Elections will determine what we do, and for term limits ultimately. But that is something to weave into, to make sure that the legislature, 1, is part of that dialogue. It shouldn't just be the executive, and 2, the legislature actually takes responsibility to continue to have a voice and multiple pairs of ears in those dialogues so that we can reflect those back to the state.
Others from AI-related harms?
That was just a question.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, you wanna move on?
I was trying to do that rather than a brain
Well,
dump.
I think kind of the last part went to 3, but yes, if you wanna do 2, that would be great.
Well, my thoughts on 2 were that first one, I'd say the first 3 bullet points, there is stuff in there that is ripe for legislative action, I felt like. Those are the election security, consumer protection, and deepfake. That was sort of some nuance was added in our conversation today around the non-consensual images, for instance. And then the other one that jumped out at me was number 4 that we also discussed in great detail around the statutory statement of intent. I do think that's actionable in the near term, but of course I'm wearing my hat on number 4, which is what's my homework, so that's one of the ones that I looked at question 2 from.
One other thing that, again, from a naive outsider's perspective, but feels like a possible, and don't laugh in the other room, possible like near-term thing is committing government to lead by example through transparent use of AI, right? Like that is, it seems like just a matter of contract negotiations and a trial period. And maybe the appropriation of some money to that, but I don't know the extent to which there's like some Maine State Gov AI plugin that all employees have access to. I think that would be an incredible show of belief in the thing that we're asking others to do. If there was that type of example from the government.
So that's really 3, but with an emphasis on government leadership.
I guess it's 2 and 3, yeah, I think that it feels.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, 2 and 3. With an emphasis on government leadership, okay, good.
Yeah, and that could be consumer or like citizen facing too on a chatbot internal trained on the data set that would be pertinent to someone accessing the DOL website or something like down in the corner in the same way you can tease questions with Gemini or ChatGPT, but
I think that could also extend into the private sector as well. I mean, the companies volunteering to really, move towards transparent use of AI. It sort of reminds me of the non-GMO movement when people really jumped on the bandwagon and, made that an advertising feature of their product or something. And I think it could be something like that.
I just want to say quickly on number question 3. I think it's just really resources, as always. Money and humans who have time, and the coordination piece was covered all of that. So that's really.
Thank you for your candor there. I think that's true for everybody. Yeah, so you're right. Good thing you're saying.
Got the last group here, just the government.
Okay, so public sector group. Hands up for the public sector group. Public sector.
Thanks, guys.
Nick, and is it just Nick?
Sarah, you're welcome.
You might be out. All right, Nick.
Nick has his hand up.
Yeah, Nick, why don't you take it away then? I was just looking to see if Nick had any friends, but he has lots of friends, but he doesn't seem to have any of his co-committee members.
A few of them were here earlier, but that's okay. I'm prepared. So yeah, in turn, and I think what'll be interesting here, especially with the previous section, is there's alignment, kind of just organically the way things laid out, but there's alignment in terms of some recommendations. So thinking about order, what I kind of thought out was first and foremost, agency roadmaps need to be done. It's going to help ensure that later investments down the road really align with the needs and with the capacity of government to be able to consume it. Establishing the interagency leadership council around AI. Obviously, governance is going to be an important part of this, and we want to make sure that our efforts are all aligned and we're moving forward together. And then touched on procurement modernization. Maybe not the whole big gamut of procurement modernization, but enough to make sure that we're able to effectively support pilots and understand how procurement would need to happen with larger future adoptions. In terms of question 2, ready for near-term implementations. I think training is one that for both state employees and municipalities would be really easy to roll out. We already have a mechanism in state government that revolves around security awareness training. Some of the municipalities are leveraging that as well, and that platform would allow for an ease of rolling out, a program of training around AI. Like the previous section was saying, the public dashboard, kind of the registry of AI tools. Albeit it would be a basic version, but it can talk about existing and or planned AI pilots, what tools are being used now, what tools potentially looking at in the future, and it would be relatively simple to stand up. And then digging into planning grants and pilots with municipalities, looking at small scale pilots, clear scope. We can do that fairly easily, and then kind of build momentum and decide how we go about funding those. And key factors for successful implementation, clear governance and accountability. Again, that's where the Leadership Council comes into play. Phased and tiered approaches, starting small, basic pilots, and scaling up as capacity grows and funding becomes more available. Resources and funding, obviously, municipalities in particular will need to look at how we can leverage either grant funds or other funds and provide technical support. Transparency and public trust, partnerships, collaboration with universities and industry to keep the momentum going. And then, equity and ethics, making sure there's safeguards in place and that we're looking at the effective and fair use of AI and accountability into the recommendations. And if I had anybody in the room with me, I'd ask thoughts, but I think I'm alone.
What thoughts from other committee members that want to help Nick out?
Any committee?
Any committee.
Can I mention, I'm a little, not worried, it's not the right word, but I feel like one of the big foundational ones in all of these is number 2 in this one, that, that if state, so many of the things that we talked about involve state governments, the advisory committee, and Mark talked about, having access to tools to do things. And so not suggesting this is the plan, but if state government goes really slow in training, really slow in rolling out tools, you put together an advisory committee and no one has any AI knowledge on it and or that type of thing. And so that foundational knowledge across state government is just as important anywhere else. It's important that commissioners and deputy commissioners and folks that are making decisions have bought into this as well. And if they're not involved, then I think a lot of these could potentially really slow. And this space is moving really, really fast, and state government needs to be a big part of that. And so it needs to move along as fast as state government can at least move.
Yep, at the
I
end.
think actually a comment on that point, thinking of how 2 and 4 may be connected and how municipalities may look to the state relative to the type of guidance that we would provide as to how adoption is occurring within the 3 branches of legislative and judicial and executive, and how that can be kind of a best practice as well. Just as a consideration.
I was just gonna throw out there once again, all right, I'm the Debbie Downer of the committee, okay? It is generally thought that governments do not move quickly. That is one of the things about government that differentiate it from other sectors.
It's been consistently proven, not generally thought. No, scientists, there's data.
Social science, real science. My point being that I don't disagree with you one bit, but I think that it is perhaps slightly unrealistic to anticipate that this, as opposed to every other very good, very important thing that comes across the desk of state government writ large, is going to move quickly. Although again, I'm agreeing with you 100% that given the rapid pace of change, the fact that government moves slowly is not advantageous. Okay, so here's my question. Is there an alternative that should be the lead?
I have confidence that state government can do that. I think this technology, I've trained over something like 1,500 people since July on these tools just because of the technology like this. That we could have 300 people on there, we could have 3,000 people on there. So I think the opportunity is there for state government to move faster. I think especially if you I think Nick's talked about identifying those, it's throughout the recommendations, identify those key leaders out there and get them out there, push forward. I think state government can do it, but if it doesn't, then I do worry that it's going to put a lot of the recommendations in jeopardy, maybe.
It's just, I don't know why this came in my head, but I think it relates to the teacher and education. It's like, how do we create an environment in state government where people have a space and are like encouraged and proud to share how they're using AI? Because I think I use it, there's people around me that use it, and I feel like there's kind of still this mentality of like, oh, are you shortcutting your workflow? And we need to actually act like, no, this is the right thing to do to provide constituent services for our people rapidly, et cetera, but I'm not hearing stories in the media of like, this is an awesome thing that a state government employee figured out to do, and let's hear from them. So I want to have the ability to celebrate in that sector as well as the education sector.
So I feel like I'm now becoming the person that's saying things that need to be said, but we might not want to say. So for example, some people might think, if I adopt this, I'm giving away my own job. Why would I adopt a technology that's going to replace me? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm talking about reality. I'm also thinking about how the federal government, starting in January, started moving very quickly and breaking things. And you know what? A number of us in this room lost our minds, right? Because they were moving really quickly and breaking things. So I'm just trying to say that for the people in this room, on this committee that have done all this work, we're behind you, but it feels unrealistic.
So does that mean there should be, so it could be that, you're using AI and that may get rid of your job. It could be that you're using AI and you get promoted. Like, does there need to be a sort of clear signal sent that there has to be rewards for people who adopt and move this mission forward? And that has to
I'm
be
sure
part
that
of
that's a part of an important dialogue, because you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But I don't know, this is aging, I know, but remember the Obama book where we all learned that the notion of a clerk is something that only exists in government? And yet we still, these were the McKinsey folks who wrote it, 25 years later have clerks. You know why? Because the clerks don't want to not have jobs as clerks. Anyway, it's very, it was eye-opening to me when I read it. And I'm picturing clerks transported into AI, so sorry.
David and then Representative Sarah.
So I continue to believe that this is an important sort of mindset position that this task force and this report can help set. I may be proven wrong. I don't think that there are going to be dozens or hundreds of clerks who are without a job because of the advent of this technology. I think that there are dozens or hundreds of clerks, to use a job category, whose jobs can be enhanced, who can do a better job, and who may find some level of appreciation for the fact that the human element is raised to a higher degree, and that can be taken on by artificial intelligence can be become a part of their job where they're using the tool as opposed to ugly. And I think in contrast, and I'll use this example specifically, but I think in contrast of robotic welders, and that's actually a case where if a business, VIW, decided that they were going to make a massive investment in robotic welders, that there's an entire job classification that could be at risk. Now, the technology exists, but VIW needs more welders today than they needed 10 years ago. So our ability to sort of push off the fear that there are large classes of people that are going to lose their jobs, and that there is the potential for enhancement of the human element of work, is just a juxtaposition that I think we'd do well to consider in that analysis. I actually just don't see a world where somebody wakes up one day and a business is invested in a bunch of AI bots and sends out layoff notices.
I agree. I want to hear Representative Sarah's point, and then I'll make a comment about that, because I think there's a lot of fear.
Yeah, and there've been a bunch of intervening comments that have generated intervening thoughts, so I'm trying very hard to stay relevant. The first thing I wanted to say had to do with the speed of government issue. And I think that what we need to discern here is between things that really have to happen fast and operating one way to ensure that we do act fast, and the things where we really need to be deliberative and deliberate on those. An example of something that really needs to happen fast is at not every level of PK to 12 education, but at the higher levels of PK to 12 education, if the teacher doesn't know how to detect AI abuse being used as a substitute for learning, that entire class of learners may fail to learn. And so those teachers need to learn how to adapt what they do so that AI does not become a substitute for learning by that teacher's students. And that's going to replace 0 teaching jobs. It's about applying the best practices enabling the teachers who have adopted best practices to transfer that knowledge as quickly as possible to other teachers so that students continue to learn in a fundamentally changed educational context. That's an example of where we need to move fast. And I'll stop there because that was the point I wanted.
I was just gonna, in reference to Dave's point, is the fear and the real data are not understood by the same groups of people often, right? And that transparency and driving that reality and overcoming that fear is an incredibly difficult thing to do, especially in our age. right? Because the fear can be stoked so easily through so many various different ways. So I think the transparency is key to this and showing that it's not, people are not losing jobs right, left, and center. All it takes is one news report by one tech executive that says, I just laid off 16,000 people because AI is saving me so much money and time in workforce, right? And then the fear just goes astronomical again. Not to mention that everybody else is saying that it's really just gonna change what workers need to do, and they need to, level up and all that kind of stuff, but it's not causing those changes. So I think that is something government can help provide, is that truth and security in the data and the transparency to be able to give people the trust and the confidence in the process as it works forward.
And just a little tag on to be able to subdivide your community. So for example, when one of the first careers that everyone came for was that lawyers aren't going to be necessary because everyone's going to have their, AI give them legal advice. You know what? There's not been a precipitous drop off of people going to law school or entering the profession. In other words, that's a community that heard that message and was like, yeah, right. And it's interesting because 15 years ago, we offshored a ton of junior level legal work that really did have an impact, and people kept going to law school. So maybe that says that we're like, what are they, lemmings, where like one goes off a cliff and like 15 follow them? Sorry.
There's a joke in there for lawyers, but I don't know it right now. I'm gonna come up with it later. Okay, other points or questions that we didn't get to? Anything that didn't contribute that didn't get said? Speak now or for all old jokes. Well, not really, because we'll meet again. Okay, we are at 1:51. Should I bring it home? Anything else?
I'll just say that the next step on that conversation for us is, as we've been doing, we will capture that conversation in writing and share it with you, and you will tell us how to make sure that it reflects the conversation that you all have just had. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, thank you to everyone who joined us in person today. It's great to get together in person. Really love it. And especially to the folks that hung out online and worked hard to hear what we were saying and participate. I really appreciate that. I want to flag for everybody, and thank you also for the staff who set this up so beautifully, arranged a lovely lunch. Really, everybody did a great job in pulling this together, so thank you. I want to flag for everybody that alongside the writing process, someone from GoPIP may be reaching out to secure supplemental materials. So things like photos or quotes or profiles or other types of things to add to the process of documentation. So keep an eye out for a request for those types of things. Dave and I appreciate prompt responses because everybody's on a deadline now. We're getting towards the end and we got to keep rolling. And so we're hoping to get everything pulled together again still by the end of October, which is moving closer and closer every second. So we want to make sure we stay on target for that. Our next meeting is October 8th from 2 to 4. Keep an eye out for emails from Dan and Scott about specific logistics for that meeting. And thank you again. Really fantastic. Appreciate everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, if I could add, thanks, a special thanks to Scott and